Hey family, welcome back to my video. Today we will see, what if Naruto was evil ruler of Konoha girls? Before we start, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the original author of this story. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. Now enjoy the video. Danzo preened internally. Oh how he loved it when shinobi deferred before him. He was the leader of the most powerful hidden village on the continent. You couldn't get much better than that. At ease, my soldiers. I have a mission for you, he replied with gusto. The lead Junin gave him a strange look, but Danzo only reveled within it. He was obviously awed by his magnanimous presence. It is an S-rank mission I feel only you four may pull off. Such is my opinion of your skill. Now where has that scroll gotten to? Danzo proceeded to search around the room hurriedly. His ninja tried to hide their impatience, but it wasn't as if their esteemed leader would notice anyway. A solitary pop announced the presence of one of Danzo's elite group. Nei, or Root, had been merged with the village ninja. The first thing Danzo had done upon his election to the post of Godem Hokage was to dissolve the Anbu into the mainstream shinobi forces, and replace their old position with his own loyal troops. This had had two far-reaching effects. 1. The success rate of EA rank missions had skyrocketed, and 2. The failure rate of S ranks had done the same. Which became a cause for concern. So Danzo, being who he was, decided that the only way to rectify the situation was to give the normal shinobi more S-rank missions and his elite route more EAs. This effectively, totally destroyed the equilibrium that had been painstakingly established by the previous Hokages, yet with the Sannin living their own lives and the most influential of the Junin practically melted into the shadows, Danzo did what he wanted. Leaving an unstable, psychotic, elderly man to make decisions for a military force must have been the worst idea anyone could have thought up. Then again, the village council was mainly made up of unstable, psychotic, elderly people, so there really was nobody to stop him. Evidence for this was in the very room Danzo was addressing after finally finding the missing mission scroll. Aha! Here it is. You, Junin-san, are to lead your team to Usada Bridge and rout one of Otto's rebel forces led by a red-haired woman known only as Karen. I order you to attack from the bridge surface, is that clear? Danzo smirked smugly. How he loved being Hokage. But sir, the Junin replied, wouldn't it be better to approach from a more hidden direction, like under the bridge? We need the element of surprise against these numbers. It was a statement of how stupid Konoha's forces regarded their leader as being that they didn't even question an S-rank mission being given to a team of 3 Chunin and a Junin. Danzo tried to look as wise as possible. Nagumo-san, I have survived 2 great shinobi wars. I have been Hokage for 2 years now. Are you claiming that you understand strategy more than I? My name is Nayako. He gritted his teeth when he replied. How many times did he have to say it to get this nutcase to remember his name? No, I'm not claiming anything of the sort, Hokage-sama. It's just I don't want any of my teammates to die, going straight in where there might be an ambush is not the best idea. Thank you for your concern, Naiko. It's Nayako. As I was saying, Nayakamakamano-san. That's not even a name. Be that as it may, those are my orders. I fully expect them to be carried out to the dot. Now, Root Soldier, what have you to say? The Nei operative, who had been standing quietly by, glanced around the room surreptitiously. There were leaves in the room. It wouldn't do to give out potentially classified information to them. What are you waiting for, man? Speak. The operative straightened his back, and Nayako almost saw the look of complete obedience behind the agent's mask. Danzo-sama, as per your orders this morning, I have been trailing Uchiha Shisui all day. Danzo began to sweat. What had he ordered that morning? Something to do with this Shisui person. Uchiha. That was it, he needed another Sharingan to add to his collection. The red and black eyes were so pretty. I see, and what have you to report? The operative stole another skeptical glance at the 4-man cell beside him before continuing. I can confirm that he does not have a blue teddy bear on his person. There was no sign of a rebellion led by Brawly the blue teddy bear. Danzo panicked internally. Were his shinobi going mad? A blue teddy bear? What did that have to do with anything? Root-san. Why were you looking for a blue teddy bear? Anger began to rise in him as Yukata-san looked like he was laughing. The Root agent looked like he didn't want to say what was going on. This was making him look stupid in front of his own men. Hurry up. I asked you a question, soldier. What was it with these imbeciles and insubordination today? Air. Those were your orders this morning, Danzo-sama. Investigate Uchiha Shisui and a possible uprising by Brawly the Blue Teddy Bear, which should be stored, hidden somewhere on his person. If Danzo was surprised before, he was freaking out now. He couldn't fathom giving out any such orders. Outwardly, however, he stroked his chin, remembering just in time to avoid the bandages covering his left eye. It wouldn't do to show them that. I see. You have done well today, Root-san. You are dismissed. The Root operative popped out immediately. The Junin looked at him funny again. This was annoying him. What did I just say? You are dismissed. I thought you were talking to the Root guy, Hokage-sama. I was referring to all of you. The Junin looked hesitant. But you addressed him directly. Never mind, we'll just be leaving Godem Dono. Danzo nodded imperiously as the four-man team walked out the door. Now what was this business with the Uchiha and Brawly the Blue Teddy Bear? He hoped it wasn't another attempt at a coup d'etat. Hadn't they learned their lesson last time they tried to overthrow Konoha? Danzo had somehow totally forgotten that there were a grand total of 3 Uchiha left in Konoha anyway. Not that he cared, however. Konoha was truly suffering in the grip of the senile old warhawk. Mitarashi Anko was quite possibly the most eccentric female Junin to ever grace the laurels of Konoha's shinobi force. She technically wasn't even a Junin for a reason nobody could really understand. She had more successfully completed missions under her belt than almost every other ninja in the village. Very few could even claim such an achievement. Now just because her enemies tended to die gruesome and absurd deaths didn't mean anything. The years had not been kind to her, however. She reflected on the state of her life as she slouched down the middle of a busy merchant district at the heart of the village, hands shoved deep into the pockets of her cream-colored trench coat, purple irises lazily tracking anything that so much as twitched in her vicinity. Her best friends of a few years ago had drifted away, leaving her stranded between wanting them back and fulfilling her job. The situation, she decided, had taken a turn for the worst. Something needed to be done, and she'd had enough of sitting on her figurative backside and moaning about it. She was an action woman, damn it, not some silly damsel in distress. If something didn't do what she wanted, she'd damn well kick it in the nuts. Hitaki Kakashi was her main grievance. The silver-haired Junin had thrown himself back into his career even though he'd practically denounced it only 3 years ago. Hadn't he been the one to remove his blood-stained mask because he couldn't take it anymore? She snorted derisively, eyeballing the pedestrians who turned to stare at her quizzically. He was suicidal, that guy, taking S rank after S rank and coming back looking more haunted than a ghost. You couldn't get much more haunted than that, she pondered. It was a ghost after all, and they were the ones doing the haunting. And why was that random dude looking at her like she's crazy or something? Ignoring the rude bystander, she continued lethargically on her way to her destination. So Kakashi was a nutcase. What else was new? Naruto had all but disappeared. Her heart twanged painfully at the thought of the blonde. She had many regrets over that little kid. Jiraiya had kept them posted, and by them, she meant her and Shisui. The perverted Sannin had searched high and low for the last of their group, only to almost give up through a lack of clues. That Gamma no Jiraiya, spymaster extraordinaire, couldn't even manage a whisper on a person's whereabouts. Shisui had woken up 2 years ago, lacking energy, a slightly suspicious outlook of the world in general, but mainly the same guy as he was before he decided to go to sleep and not wake up for almost a whole year. Anko had slapped him before hugging him. She'd then realized that he'd fallen unconscious again, to her great mortification. Tsunade had thrown her out after that. It was still the butt of a good many jokes between them. Shisui's aunt had decided that since old Sarutobi was no longer there to prevent her, she'd regained her status as an elite Junin and began to take missions once again. The Uchihas were happy. Shisui was happy. All was right with the world. Except everything else. She sighed tiredly, breaching the entrance to a random cafeteria she and Shisui had picked as today's meeting spot. She made a beeline for the table with the messy black bed head sticking over the brim of a crumpled newspaper in the far corner. She slid into a chair in front of him and retrieved the scroll that was the reason for their rendezvous from the folds of her jacket. Twirling over her right hand expertly, she smirked before speaking. And the snake mistress does it again. You're losing quite badly, Shisui-kun. Sharingan eyes flashed dangerously as the morning's paper lowered ever so slightly. Oh ho ho ho. Going for deadly this time, huh? Oh, shut up, Anko. Don't get so stuck up just because nobody cares enough about you to think you're a threat. Anko squawked indignantly. I'll have you know that it's my amazing stealth skills that grant me success, thank you very much. Like painting the Raikage's face with Omni Paint? Anko glared. That was a low blow. Shisui chuckled as he placed the newspaper atop the rickety cafe table. He extended his fist and the two tapped knuckles. What you got? He leaned forward expectantly. Anko unrolled the scroll and peered at its contents. Says here that they believe he's been spotted at some random town near the border to Kumo. It was a Civ sighting though, so we can't be sure. Shisui groaned. And here he'd thought they had something substantial at last. Where the heck did you find that? I told you to grab it from Danzu's office, not the rumor mill's bin. Anko waved a hand airily. That's not the point, Shisui. Shisui glanced at her nervously. Where did you really pick that up from? Anko blanched and hid her face behind the unfurled parchment. Okay, so it was the bin. The Hokage's bin, who cares where? Danzo sticks his classified information. I don't mind as long as we end up getting it. I thought you were about to say he stuck it up his. Shut up. The pair were garnering many funny looks at this point, not that they paid it any heed. No, but seriously, Danzo stores classified scrolls in the bin? Anko groaned audibly. Tell me about it, she muttered. At least he could make an effort to be an actual leader now that he has the post. Instead we're being whittled away little by little. Shisui laughed. It was a depressing situation indeed that he could find mirth in it. Let me see that. He reached over and plucked the classified from his friend's hands. Studying it intensely for a few minutes, he gave a start before looking up at Anko, who had been peering at him inquisitively. Wait a minute. Anko, didn't Jiraiya last say that he thought he'd gone to Kumo and that it was the only explanation what with their media blackout? Anko grumbled under her breath before answering. That's just speculation and you know it. Even Suna have been ignoring us ever since that Tanuki Brad became Cage. Is it just me or does Naruto have too many friends in high places? Shisui laughed uproariously. That's supposed to be a good thing, ha ha ha. Anko gave in and chuckled with him for a moment before they fell into an uncomfortable silence. After a couple of minutes, Shisui raised his courage to break it. So we're following it then? His companion shrugged. It's the only thing we have to go on. We might find him and then we can go save Kashi from himself. Anko finished his sentence for him. Shisui looked down desperately. Anko stood abruptly. She took a deep breath. I'm in. Forever and always. Shisui grinned. Let's bring him back home. In a modest-sized store, complete with full-length glass pane. Windows, spectacular lights and weapons everywhere, a doorbell chimed pleasantly. Higurashi 1010, formerly, just 1010, perked up as the front door to Higurashi's weapons store flew open. It was her very own store now, hers and hers alone. She'd had to give up her Chunin status. That was true, but she still trained every day. In the end, Naoto-san's bestowing of Higurashi inheritance upon her was so incredibly touching and meaningful that she decided to honor it over her own dreams. So here she stood, facing her old teammates, who had for some unexplained reason, decided to drop by. 1010. How youthfully spiffing it is to see you once again. 1010's eyebrows rose gracefully. Gai-sensei, what have you been teaching him now? The ever-boisterous Rock Lee strode into the store's interior, bowl cut shining, leg weights clinking and a huge smile stretching his face. Behind him came an almost identical copy, yet much taller Maeda Guy, and following up the rear was the stoic Hyuga Neji, who, amazingly, actually smiled as he stared around the shop of blessedly pointy things. Her old team, she breathed mentally. Nonsense 1010. You have no need to call me sensei any longer. I have been telling you this for years now. 1010 smiled contentedly as she hopped down from her seat behind the counter at the back of the store, chocolate hair swinging, eyes alight with warmth. She was a changed girl, she'd accepted. What she was, where she'd come from and how much of a brat she'd been. She'd wondered for a couple of years now how Naruto had even put up with her. You'll always be a sensei to me, Gai-sensei. The man positively beamed. Bad idea, girl. How's the store coming along? He talks. 1010 placed a hand over her chest and used the other to fan herself at Neji's question. The Hyuga rolled his eyes. Guy and Lee laughing wholeheartedly as they moved down the aisles to the bodyweights section. Yes, you'd find I do. Miracles do happen, huh? She grinned. Indeed, by the name of Uzumaki Naruto. They shifted uneasily at that. Too many depressing memories attached to a name. She scrabbled for something else to talk about, alighting on the first topic that came to mind. How's Hinata? She inquired hurriedly. It was as if life was suddenly poured into the Hyuga's body. His head rose, his eyes began to sparkle, which was a tad disturbing in the presence of the two very sparkly people. Fine. Better even. She responds to her name now, but we can't get her to stop sucking her thumbs. Hiyashi-sama is getting mildly impatient. 1010 glared. Make sure he remembers who's the cause of the situation in the first place then. Neji nodded happily, not allowing 1010's ire to affect his good mood in the slightest. As I do. Every day in fact. 1010 giggled. Good. They fell into a companionable silence, each left to their own thoughts. 1010 began to reminisce over Hinata's status these past few years. Tsunade had rescued her and an Uchiha from the infamous Ward 18 of Konoha's Central Hospital 2 years prior. Both had been kept on some kind of anesthetic that induced unconsciousness for large periods of time. To what end, no one actually knew, but Tsunade-sama and Jiraiya-sama believed it was something to do with their incompetent leader. Hinata had woken up to find her family staring at her, lost and having no idea how to handle a relative they'd all thought dead actually regaining her senses and waking up before them. Of course, it would have been a difficult scenario if she could recognize it as such. Instead, her more than 6 years of sleep had meant her psyche had not only stopped maturing, but had also regressed. It was almost as if a 2-year-old was inhabiting a 14-year-old's body. She slowly regained limb coordination and she had begun to speak, no sign of her mental stimuli that had led her to attempt suicide at the age of 6 beyond not allowing anyone to touch her without crying for a night and day. Neji had been overjoyed to have his cousin back. Finding strength in Naruto's words from their fight, he too had begun to change, as had the Hyuga as a whole. It was disconcerting to see a family who prided themselves in austerity, actually acting like a family for once. 1010 slipped past Neji and decided to see what Lee and Guy Sensei were doing. It had been awkward when she'd turned in her Hite Ite. There'd been a few months where they hadn't known what to say to each other, any of them, but that had broken when 1010 had sent them presents from the store for all the years they'd been with her. Lee and Guy Sensei had gone nuts over the chakra weights, this one. She turned the corner to find the teacher and student staring at the rack of knuckle dusters with stars in their eyes. She groaned. Internally, this would not end well. At least she'd make a lot of money today. Lee rounded on her. 1010. My beautiful teammate. Are these new? The gangly taijutsu Chunin pointed at the shiny chakra-repellent knuckle dusters taking up centerpiece on the aisle behind him. She nodded. Yes Lee, they are. I haven't tested them, but it said on the box that they are chakrophobic. Their eyes practically glowed. Chakrophobic you say? Guy began to stroke his chin animatedly. As in, I could punch through a jutsu and not be hurt? That's the idea, 1010 confirmed, but I wouldn't go trusting them all the way sensei. Remember, there's a lot more of your body that needs protection than just your fists in that sort of situation. Guy shook his head as he turned to glance at his mini-me of a student. Lee. What do you think? Rock Lee wasn't called Rock Lee for nothing. I'll buy the whole shelf. Lee, that is an excellent idea. Yosh. Let us bring our taijutsu to new heights with these weapons. 1010 couldn't help but grin. Next time, she'd be sure to stock up on extra of the latest taijutsu goods. It was good for business. Wind, rain and leaves. That was all he could see. Then again, traveling at the speed he was, it was a surprise he could see anything at all. Traveling in a circle, he corrected himself, spinning round and round actually. The tap to his person came as he knew it would, signaling that it was time to stop. How does one stop spinning at almost 5 rotations a second? Ferocious winds picked up around his body, his chakra spiking along his limbs, forcing his body to a stop. The ground began to tear, buckle and smoke as he almost drilled right into it. He eventually came to a halt, sweat pouring from his forehead and plastering his shirt to his back. He was a sight to see, sitting in a small crater of earth with smoke curling over his limbs, almost caressing him in its tainted, stinking embrace. His head rose to acknowledge his sensei of 2 years. The man was hopping from foot to foot with a manic look in his eyes. He breathed out slowly. Looks like he'd finally done it then. He reached up to brush his blonde hair from his eyes. 14 years and still cracking. That was him, the one and only Uzumaki Naruto. His exhilarating thoughts ground to an abrupt halt as a stick smashed his head into the ground. He moaned. The damn man was mute, but so aggressive. He leapt to his feet in consternation. Gigi, I've had enough of you hitting me around like some ping-pong ball. You're gonna pay for that. What ensued was the most comical chase known to mankind. The citizens of the beach town Mori turned to stare as a teenager chased after a shrunken old man with a bent back and yet could not catch him. Jutsu after jutsu tore after the man, but the old guy simply avoided them as if they were petals he didn't quite like falling upon him. The chase suddenly turned race, took to the rooftops, the passers-by simply chuckling at the familiar scene. Sensei stopped on a certain house and flopped bonelessly to the ground, his stick clattering next to him. Naruto reached the surface a few moments later, only to find the man patting the roof beside him. He smiled and sat beside him, turning his eyes to gaze up at the stars. It had been 2 years since he had awoken in an unfamiliar room, bandaged so meticulously from head to toe that he couldn't see through his eyes. They'd been bandaged too. Of course, he could have rectified that problem if his arms hadn't been practically stuck to his sides with the very same restriction aid. After a few days of someone, he had no idea who, feeding him some weird-tasting glob of stuff, he finally glimpsed his mysterious savior. It was an old man. An old, withered man, who was slightly insane, and that was putting it mildly. He lived alone in a cottage a good ways away from the village of Mori. Mori was a town situated very close to the border of Kumo and Hai, decked with beautiful beaches nobody seemed to use, green pastures smothered with stinky manure and houses that reminded him that builders should be the one to build houses. Not crazy people like Sensei. He did not know his real name, the man couldn't speak, write nor read. At least he could understand speech, at least Naruto thought he did. After a period of awkwardness, where Naruto couldn't really move, the old guy had helped him for a couple of weeks, only to catch him in his old habit of twirling things around his hand with wind chakra. Naruto was very surprised to hear a loud squeak from the entrance to the cottage that had become his home. He pictured the scene. Now, chuckling under his breath at how Sensei had acted. It was as if the man's birthday had come early. And then it was surprise after surprise. Naruto firmly thought that nothing could shock him anymore. It turned out that the old guy knew a lot about shinobi, not just a lot, but he knew more about the techniques than most anyone else. The strange thing was, he couldn't actually do anything with that knowledge since he was a civilian. What progressed from there was possibly the most absurd relationship formed on the face of the earth. Sensei would attempt to help with his training. Being mute and illiterate made it only slightly difficult. Only slightly. He would attempt to give tips and explanations through gestures and guttural sounds accompanied with crude drawings. Naruto would interpret it in a way and eventually work out what the guy was talking about. Most of the time, he ended up learning something so outlandish that he was certain the man had not meant that at all. But Sensei would be totally over the moon about it. Why? He had absolutely no idea. Did teachers become happy when their students learnt something they weren't even trying to teach? Sensei would always dance with his stick at that time. The weirdest dance you'd never seen, to be sure. An almost weightless arm settled over his shoulders and he gazed sideways at the old male beside him. It was nice, he decided, to be able to sit here with someone who had no expectations of him, knew little about him and yet able to provide him a home and food and treat him as family would. At least, this was what Naruto thought family would do. He wouldn't know, he was a bit short in the family department. His life hadn't really changed drastically since leaving Konoha. He was deathly afraid that the homicidal Uchiha Saiyan would eventually catch up to him and kill everyone around. They'd both been injured terribly in that battle, but Naruto had no doubt that if he'd managed to survive, then so had the Uchiha. He shivered unconsciously. He'd been beaten up so bad then, it was a wonder he hadn't died. It had taken him almost a whole month to recover. He'd made a lot of friends in Mori, nowhere near the level as his old crew, but hey, a guy takes what he can get. He missed them so much, he didn't know what was worse, not being able to talk to them, see them, laugh with them like he used to, or not knowing whether he would die in the next moment should the psychotic red-eyed guy turn up on Sensei's doorstep. His heart clenched with anguish. Why did he have to run away? He couldn't face them, not now, not after abandoning them right after a freaking invasion. He'd thrown their trust away. All this time he'd thought he was the one with the short straw. He was the one that had lived an unacceptable life. But that was arrogance. Arrogance and petulance. It wasn't what happened in the past that mattered, it was how you were living the present. And then he'd gone and done the same thing he'd accused Sarutobi Gigi of. His throat constricted and a sort of sob leapt from it. The arm tightened around his shoulders imperceptibly. He looked up hesitantly, but Sensei was smiling at him, not the stupid, goofy smiles he usually had. This one was a genuine, soft and understanding curve of the lips. Naruto breathed out slowly. He would just have to handle being apart from them for the rest of his life. They'd never accept his excuses anyway. Madara would kill them. He wasn't short on friends in Mori. He had his own crew here, and they were all his age. Some people thought them a gang, but Naruto knew differently. They were allies of justice. So what if they caused the problems in the first place, as long as they fixed it in the end, right? He gazed up at the heavens, the scatters of silver stars sometimes broken by spots of red and brilliant, semi-translucent nebulae stretching the horizon. He was like one of them, a lone star burning its way out until it blinked from existence, never to be remembered. Except for the brief moments of blazing glory left in its wake, it was a beautiful metaphor in how apartment. He would keep living in the present, discarding his past no matter where he ended up in the world. Because that's what he did best. The start of another epic. I'm really excited about this, people. Let's see it from you too. Let me just say that this was my most favorite chapter for a long while. I hope you all enjoy it more than you did KNP. Because it's only just the beginning. Welcome to KAHF. Phase 2 Konoha. At his fingertips by Mega B Chapter 2, Phase 2. I spot 2, no, make that 3, Anko whispered softly, brushing a stray leaf from her hair. Shisui nodded slowly, double-checking with his Sharingan to confirm that there were, in fact, only 3 root Anbu guarding the main gate out of the village. The plan had been to avoid contact with any shinobi that may have been on patrol, but upon finding their route blocked, they had no choice but to either engage the guards or find an alternative path, neither of which they wanted to compromise this early in the proceedings. Shisui twitched as his Sharingan faded to black irises. This isn't going to work. We need some way to get around them. Anko nodded silently, biting her lip in consternation as they crouched, masking their chakra levels within the brush ringing the village. After a brief moment of silence, she scratched her thighs and gazed up at the night's moon. I say we just bust in there and take them down, Shisui groaned. And for the last time, that's not going to work. The last thing we need is Danzo finding out we've snuck out right under his nose without his permission. Anko huffed. Okay, then we need a distraction or something. Shisui sighed. Looks like there was nothing else for it. Standing silently, he pushed a branch aside and made to step forward only to have a strong hand seize his collar and pull him into an adjacent bush. Another palm clapped over his mouth before he could make a sound. Shish. His captor hissed. You just said the last thing you wanted was a confrontation, you idiot. The Uchiha survivor found that he was free to move his head, even if he couldn't speak over the fist stuck into his mouth. He gazed at the person holding him, only to find blonde hair in swinging pigtails, and a green coat fluttering in the wind. MMPH. You have to promise you won't make noise before I let you go, kiddo. She was laughing at him. Damn her, he nodded quickly. Good, she said as she released him. He turned to find Jiraiya holding Anko similarly, though his hand was straying to places that he really shouldn't be touching. A dull, oof, sounded as he was kicked in the nether regions, the toad sage crumpling to nothing more than quivering mush beside them. Shisui sighed again and turned to the only sane one beside himself in his vicinity. Why are you here? I thought Jiraiya was out looking for Naruto, he asked immediately. Tsunade grinned. You didn't think you'd sneak out looking for Naruto without us finding out, did you? Jiraiya's search didn't turn up much, she smiled. Warmly. Shisui shook his head in resignation. He really should have seen it coming. Somehow, the two Sannin had their eyes and ears everywhere in Konoha, more so than the Hokage even. Actually, we were planning on getting out without anyone knowing, but I guess we can't do much about it now. Too right, you can't, you have a lead on his whereabouts, it wasn't even a question. Yeah, otherwise we wouldn't be leaving, would we? He smirked. Don't get smart with me, brat. Her frown dissolved into a slightly amused facade after hearing her own words. At any rate, you have a problem with those guards up there. Do you have a plan for it? Shisui scratched his temple idly. Nah, we thought they wouldn't bother this late at night, especially with how Root has been acting recently. But there they are, I guess. We were going to crank some kinda distraction and slip past. Good, we can do that for you. Oh, stop crying, Jiraiya. It's your own damned fault. She strode over to her downed friend and kicked him for good measure. The man groaned and rolled onto his back, glaring balefully at the purple-haired woman who returned his stare wholeheartedly. Did you have to do that? He whined pitifully. Next time you try something like that, I'll have a snake do it instead, Anko hissed through clenched teeth. Same place too. With fangs. Jiraiya paled considerably and scooted away from her as far as he could go and not poke from the greenery they were hiding in. And no need to go that far, Anko. I was joking, only joking, he stammered. Anko smiled maliciously before turning to regard the other two. What will you be doing after you get us through? Tsunade bobbed her head in acknowledgement. We're going to hit Mikazuki Medical. I don't know what's going on there, but the events of these last few years have all pointed to it as Danzu's front for control over the village. Some weird stuff has been happening recently, and Ward 18 was just the tip of the iceberg. She sent a significant look Shisui's way at that statement. Shisui moved to the edge of the clearing and peeped out at the guards who were standing like statues in a neat row in front of the gatehouse. Nay, were so very strange. All right. How we gonna handle this then? Have you got something in mind? He asked. Don't you worry about that. Let's just say that someone will be having a very amphibious surprise. Jiraiya chortled at his own words. A trio of irks sounded in the still air, and the four shinobi looked on as the gate guards collapsed in a heap. Shisui was the only one to spot the tiny dart frogs leaping away from the bodies. He looked back at Jiraiya with a single eyebrow raised. Frogs? I thought you summoned toads? Jiraiya chuckled languidly. You noticed him? I called in a couple of favors from some distant relatives of old Gamabunta. Those little troublemakers are going to go and attack random people to leave a nice, clear trail behind them. Don't worry, he smiled. Their poison is very easy to counteract, and not very toxic at all, or at least, that's what Tsunade tells me. Tsunade nudged her friend and turned to regard the other two. All hospitals have standard anti-venoms for the more common poisons, and dart frog toxin is one of them. Now you two need to get going before someone comes to check on those guys. Shisui nodded, silently in awe at the amount of thought the two Sannin had put into the operation already. Right. Shall we, Anko? And as the wind blew, the four figures disappeared, almost as silently as the leaves fluttering upon the wind. The Hokage's chambers of Hokage Tower were usually very busy throughout the day. Missions were not specifically handed out by the Hokage unless they had vital importance, or were top secret, and yet when a team completed a mission, it was the first place they stopped for debriefing. In the case of Danzo's regime, nobody actually wanted to stop there, unless they were insane themselves, or they were Nei operatives, otherwise it was an unspoken rule for everyone else to avoid the place like the plague. No one actually knew if Danzo's dementia was contagious or not, they would rather not find out either. So it was that a head-bandaged old war hawk lifted his head to survey the latest group to enter his domain. Make that one-man group. Ah, Nyakamakimano-san, I trust you and your team were successful in your mission, him? He groused, totally failing to notice the large wound across the right side of the Junin's forehead swathed in bandages. His limp was overly pronounced and he was visibly restraining his total vilification of the village leader if only because of the man's position. Well, speak up. My plans are always perfect as you now know. Iwinayako seemed to disagree with this statement. Success? He hissed, his left eye squinting in rage. The only success we had was losing all my team. There was a stiff moment of silence whereupon the Godem Hokage stood unbelieving of his subordinate. Come now, Nakumo, would you shut the hell up for a minute, you damn wrinkly butthead? For the second time in a single meeting, Danzo was completely and utterly shocked. Excuse me, Junin-san. Do you know who I am? Nayako took a huge, laboring breath before turning away from his hated leader. They all died. All three of them. And it was all because of your stupid idea to rush the bridge head-on. I don't know who died and made you leader, but hell, you're killing us. Danzo had never felt so angry in his life. It was preposterous, some little, green-eared boy claiming to know better than he. Better than the village's tactician and espionage expert for more than 60 years? It was his turn to show anger. Remove this raving lunatic at once. He has clearly been touched in the head by his ordeal. Take him to the hospital and have a psychiatrist examine him. His two bodyguards appeared, grabbed Nayako, and disappeared. With no words between them. Root knew how to keep their deranged general happy. Of course, by leaving him with no one to watch over him, there remained a huge gaping security hole. One that a certain Uchiha had been waiting for. Melting smoothly from the shadows, he stood before the Godem Hokage, his old bone-white Anbu mask fixed over his face. Sharingan ablaze and coattails flapping from the breeze passing through an open window. Danzo startled heavily. He had disbanded the Anbu, hadn't he? He was sure none of those dreaded, frightening masks existed anymore. How they terrified him so. Who are you? Uchiha Itachi swiftly removed his mask, falling to a single knee with fluidity nary seen amongst the ranks of shinobi of all 5 major countries. Danzo-sama, I have returned as per the Sandame's request upon completion of my secondary mission. My clues have dried up and I have come seeking further information. It was almost the longest 2 sentences he had uttered in many years. It felt foreign. You Uchiha Itachi. Danzo squeaked. Guards, arrest him now. But of course, he had only just sent them away. Itachi's gaze never wavered as he considered the ex-elder. Danzo-sama, you would arrest one of your own? His voice was like silk. You are no shinobi. You are a murderer. We shall dispose of you yet, traitor. Itachi moved so fast, it was as if he had been holding his chikuto to the chapping white skin of Danzo's neck the entire time. I have come seeking information. I will not be killed by my own kin. And then he released his chakra, and such a force and pressure it was that Danzo screamed pitifully, his eyeballs rolling back in their sockets and his bowels releasing their contents. Itachi stepped back and swiftly sheathed his blade. He stared, unblinking at the shriveled man who had deigned to call himself Hokage. The man was crazy and had amnesia to boot. How he had forgotten his most precious sleeper agent when he and his 3 companions had been the one to appoint him as such was simply incomprehensible. Stepping to the far wall of the room, he sealed quickly, biting his finger and then placing his hand gently upon the wall. A small section of brickwork shone a bright turquoise before disintegrating before his eyes. Sitting upon a shelf in the small alcove, laid a thick, bound notebook with a scuffed, faded cover and wilting pages. He scooped it up and hid it within his cloak. He was done here. He walked gracefully to the open window, his eyes watching the so-called Godem Hokage. The pitiful man wouldn't last long. When Naruto-kun decided to end his little charade, things would change quickly. He had no illusions of what would happen in that time. For the moment, he needed to find the final clue left behind by the Edian library. He was so close, yet so far. His blade was unsheathed and flashing before his eyes in an instant. The speed of his opponent's blade was almost belied by the soft clang that heralded the contact of their edges. Itachi gazed into the masked gaze of the one man he feared on the surface of the earth. Su Taicho-sama. Please refrain. I was here for only a moment as my duty demanded. There were only a few people who could sneak up on him. One of them was the embodiment of silence, but she had an advantage with that paper ability of hers. Another was before him, blade against his own. A tense minute passed before the immense pressure on his arm lifted. You were never here. The masked man whispered. The room became empty save for a quivering pile of flesh laying in his own excrement. Heavy aluminium doors groaned as they parted and swung inwards, dust swirling as if a mini tornado had erupted within the confines of an old warehouse close to the small business section of Mori. Uzumaki Naruto, smile uninhibited, blonde hair flapping, strode confidently into the middle of the expansive floor which housed naught but a few wooden crates stacked haphazardly around the storage building. All conversation ceased as he made his way towards the single flickering bulb, its light illuminating a radius of a single meter. Eager eyes peered inwards, excitement and unbridled intrigue holding their tongues until their leader could impart upon them his choice words. "Are you ready for a job, you noobheads?" A thunderous cheer arose within the warehouse confines. It was almost adoring adulation, yet Naruto was not fooled. "We're gonna hit another one of those pubs." Old man Terracotta thought it was a good idea to mess with the Kazejin. But we don't take these things lying down. He enjoyed himself too much in these situations, it seemed. "Kozu, you take 3 people and destroy all their stock from the back. Simone, you need to stick around the rooftops and see what you can do about them looking out. Got it? Good. Mio, grab your sword and come with me. We're charging down the front." His audience roared their approval, and in the next moment, the warehouse had become a whirlwind of activity. Laughter and bubbling voices could be heard from miles around as the young teens gathered up their things and departed the once abandoned building the Kazejin had taken as their headquarters. Naruto spun on his heel and headed for the half-raised metal shutter that hung at the main entrance, a tall raven-haired girl with soft features and sharp eyes joining him along the way. 3 others caught up to the two as they exited the warehouse, Naruto's broad grin only growing wider at the thought of what they were about to do. "What we doing today, Naru?" Mio's tone was soft, yet firm. It was the reason he had chosen her as his second in command. She was also the only one allowed to address him with any familiarity, causing much jealousy among the other kids. If Naruto was honest with himself, it was probably because she reminded him a lot of Yugo, but he wasn't. His inability to face any reminder of his past leading to immediate animosity. "Don't call me that." How he hated the confused look she shot at him whenever he berated her. Arale Mio had joined up very early on. In fact, she was probably his first acquaintance within the group of fun-loving teens growing up within the sleepy port town. They had become fast friends, although Naruto would never admit it aloud. It was another trait that endeared him to their group, even though, like Mio, many of them were older than he. "You didn't answer the question." Naruto sighed and punched one of the boys who had chosen to speak, who protested weakly and settled for glaring at his blonde leader. Terracotta G thought it was so funny to chuck his unused rubbish through the window of Uncle Rika's place. "This calls for payback." Mio laughed heartily and something stirred within his gut. He roughly squashed the old longing for his Konoha friends. He was past that. And the Kazejin were his new posse. "No Mephisto today?" Mio asked. "Dunno. It's possible he's involved in all of this, and I wouldn't put it past that drunkard to hire that chimp." The other 3 shivered at the mention of the phantom menace that terrorized their town. Once a month they'd be called out to try and stop the cloaked and hooded individual who delighted in blowing things up. In only a year and a half since his first appearance in Mori, the ghost-like person had exploded a vat of raw fish across a mildly populated street, blown up the anti-chakra police precinct, destroyed a tree right in front of a herd of flamingo, and causing them to hound through town with vengeance. It was a wonder nobody had been hurt in these incidents, and yet they were no closer to catching the assailant than the downtown security was, despite their superior intelligence. Because everybody knew that adults are dumb. Naruto's group reached the side street that doubled as a shortcut to Terracotta's bar. They hid next to each other as they cautiously peered around the corner. The front was bustling with evening business as usual, and Mio began to worry about how they would actually get in to have the nighttime fun they were planning. "Ah, they got the place staked out," Naruto whined. "This calls for drastic action. Nishu, you and Izango cause a big distraction. Mio and Takashi will stay here and get in when I signal. I'm gonna go infiltrate and raise some hell." Mio perked up at the suggestion, and the others sighed. Their leaders were insane. They had no idea why they were following the 2 nutcases. Oh yeah, they had a crapload of fun along the way. "Oh, but how will you get in, Naruto?" The blonde began to cackle. "Oh ho 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 ho. I have the best idea ever. Tell me," Mio demanded excitedly. "Nah. You can't just leave me hanging like this." "I can and I will." Naruto was forced to duck the playful swipe of her wooden sword resulting from his teasing. "Oh fiend. Remember how Kozu's gonna go blow up the back of the shop?" He continued at Mio's nod. "Well, they have these big, brown barrels of drink stored there, right? So all I gotta do is hide in one until they open it. It's awesome. Mio clapped and jumped up and down. Nishu decided that he'd better leave before he caught the insanity disease. 5 hours later found a solitary barrel of booze stood in the center of the pub's storage room. Kozu's team had removed the rest of them and disposed of them in a fiery ball of glory right in front of the shop. Of course, this meant that the rest of the Kazejin had hightailed it from the vicinity, cackling all the while as the patronage could only stare bewildered at their stock going up in flames. It was to this scene that Anko and Shisui tracked Naruto's chakra signal to. They had employed a clever tracking seal crafted by Jiraiya that used any blood seal to track its owner. After living with Naruto for so many years, both of them had easy access to seals he had made for them, some intentionally and some they were too scared of to touch. Who knew what Naruto's hormone-addled brain would come up with next? It was ingenious, really. Blood tied the user with a minuscule amount of chakra, possibly the most efficient art within the sealing arts itself. All Jiraiya was required to do was connect a simple chakra node to a reverse-engineered beacon. Instead of taking chakra from the user and sending it out, it would take chakra from the outside and send it down the link, back to the one who first crafted the seal. Jiraiya claimed he'd made the sealing discovery of the century, but all of them knew that he was simply taking credit after studying that one seal Naruto had made that left the Hyuga in an uproar a few years ago. Shisui lightly tapped the barrel with his booted feet. It says he's in here. Anko shot him a disgruntled look. I thought you didn't drink? If you really wanted this slosh so much, we coulda just got some from the front of the shop. No, you idiot. Look, it says Naruto's chakra source is in this barrel. Anko continued the incredulous look. In a barrel? Right. And I'm supposed to be the idiot here? Maybe your coma messed with your head? Why the hell would Naruto be hiding in a wine barrel of all things? Shisui shook his head exasperatedly. You're asking me? This is Naruto we're talking about. He's more barmy than you are. You've got a point there. Shisui nodded encouragingly. Hey, what the hell is that supposed to em? And then the barrel crashed open with a splintering rumble of wood. A puddle of lilac liquid spreading beneath their toes. Sitting slumped upon the ground was none other than the blonde in question himself. Any jubilation they had immediately felt, all inclinations to group hug and party at their reunion died a harsh death in the face of morbid curiosity upon the loud, grating burp followed by a small hiccup from the young teen. Ruto. Why the heck are you hiding in a wine barrel? It escaped from her mouth before she could stop herself. HMPSH, Ankoshish. What you doin' Haresh? I wash Trentu bust Terry Kiji, Tokiji's pie hole. Yosh. He's drunk. Shisui deadpanned. Congratulations Mr. Obvious, Anko hissed. Suddenly, the inebriated blonde stumbled to his feet. Mashtos you nimble wimble. I's gonna take you down todaysh. Anko and Shisui could only stare with growing bewilderment as a tipsy figure, cloaked in a black cape with a hood thrown up to hide his face, dropped down from the roof and landed flat on its nose. What followed was even more strange as the two opponents proceeded to punch each other, only to miss and topple to the ground in a heap. The hooded figure's cape came undone on the way down, causing its features to be exposed, only further confusing the audience. It was Naruto. Make that a Naruto clone, they both thought as it puffed into oblivion upon striking the ground. He was fighting himself. Shisui, what the hell is going on? The Uchiha could only shrug and close his eyes. He had absolutely no idea how their erstwhile blonde friend managed to lose more marbles when he clearly had none to begin with. I dunno. Z's and so they meet. Honestly, I quite loved that last scene. It was delightfully absurd, even to my standards. I apologize for taking so long with this. Work and education do take priority at times, but we're reaching the point that I'm really dying to write. At that point, I'm sure I'll simply bang my fingers on the keyboard until they're sore. I hope you all enjoyed it and do leave me a review. I know I was horrible with reviews for the first chapter. It was because they piled up so quickly that when I logged into my email the next day, it was like looking up at the peak of Everest from its base and thinking, oh God, am I really going to climb this? And yes, I am no mountaineer. Laters people, the bee of all bees. Phoenix Rise Konoha. At his fingertips by Mega B Chapter 3, Phoenix Rise. Shisui stooped and hauled the collapsed blonde onto his shoulder. would you quit staring and gimme a hand here? He snapped. But, I still have no idea what just happened, Anko whined. You and me too, but if we don't get him somewhere relatively sane, we'll never get an answer out of him. Seemingly snapping her from her trance, Orochimaru's erstwhile protege shook her head before throwing one of Naruto's arms over her shoulder, Shisui repeating the action for the other. God, he's gotten damn heavy. This can't be from just ramen. Shisui grunted, shifting his grip on the young teen's torso so that he wouldn't fall over mid-stride. Blasphemy. Naruto. Eating something other than ramen. Don't let him hear you say that or who knows what'll happen. Shisui sighed and began his journey towards the street, Anko attempting to move in sync to avoid any unfortunate accidents. When they breached the side door leading out into a cobblestone street attached to the main road in front of the quiet neighborhood corner, Shisui breathed in the moist, calming scent of the ocean to the north on the outskirts of Mori. What the hell were you doing here, Naruto? This place is so far from Konoha, he whispered. The blonde grunted in his sleep but other than that, showed no signs of regaining consciousness. Where should we take him? Anko asked, peering anxiously up and down the small back street. No idea. Somewhere quiet, I guess. They both tensed at the sound of pattering feet, two pairs approaching their position. They distinctly heard labored breathing, puffing, yet vaguely excited. They shared a bewildered glance before turning to the far entrance of the street where two faces snuck around the corner with cautious expressions. One was female. Raven locks straight down to mid-back, glitteringly mischievous eyes and a broad grin. The other was a short boy, far more reserved, his tousled brown hair pulled into a loose center parting. They were both dressed casually, although the girl held herself with poise, denoting a certain measure of training, a bakan tied to her waist with a gray sash. Oh look, Takashi, it's Ruto, the girl chirped. For some reason, this caused her small compatriot to groan in consternation. They jogged up to the two Konoha nin, both relieved at the sight of the unconscious blonde. Anko and Shisui exchanged another look, this time of dawning realization. And what would you two want with little ol' Naruto? See, we got dibs on this dunderhead, Anko growled. Mio clapped excitedly before reaching a slim hand out in front of the purple-headed Junin's nose. My name's Mio. Any friend of Ruto's is a friend of mine. Her voice almost matched her megaton smile. She's so bubbly, Anko thought. She shook the girl's hand, however, noting her above-average grip strength and focused eyes. So this was one of the people the stupid Gaki had hung out with since leaving the Hidden Leaf. Anko, she responded, eliciting a grateful giggle from the overly happy girl. Anko frowned internally at the situation. They needed to move. She was prevented from moving ahead by Shisui's voice. Would you two know anything about why we found this idiot drunk to his toes and hiding in a wine barrel? He was certainly as irked at the past couple of minutes as she was, it seemed. Mio giggled again. Oh, that might be because he decided it was fun to hide in there, she said. And why, exactly, would he want to hide in a wine barrel? Anko would have laughed at the audible whine in his voice if she wasn't so curious herself. Well, that's because he was trying to sneak into the pub, of course. Terracotta Jii thought it was a great idea to pick on the Kazejin and Naruto decided he wasn't having any of it. This time Shisui really did groan. What he's trying to say, Anko offered, is that he wants to know what situation would cause him to want to hide in there in the first place. Oh, in that case, Naruto's our leader, you see, the leader of the Kazejin. We sort of do our own thing around town, pulling pranks and stuff. Naruto wanted to get inside that shop, but couldn't through the front door, and that's what he decided to do instead. Anko looked slightly put off at being interrupted so easily, yet she didn't say anything. They really did need to get indoors. I'm not saying I understand a word of what you just said, but do you have somewhere we can talk to this lunatic in private? Somewhere indoors preferably, Shisui asked hesitantly. Mio turned to grin at Takashi, yet the shorter male didn't seem to share her enthusiasm. Sure. We'll take you to our hideout. Anko distinctly got the impression that the word hideout was uttered a tad bit over-eagerly. She couldn't help the swirling of dread that began at the pit of her gut as the black-haired girl sauntered off down the street, her gait oddly reminding her of a Cheshire cat. This is what you call a hideout? Yup. Anko groaned. It's an abandoned warehouse. I expected an underground bunker with the latest tech or something far more awe-inspiring than this. How old, exactly, are you again? Takashi's question was answered by a swift kick to the shin end. Anko couldn't help but notice the frosty glare Mio sent the boy's way. Shisui settled Naruto's unconscious form gently into a rickety plastic chair cushioned with not more than a thin layer of uncovered, stained foam. The blonde's arms flopped uselessly at his sides although he made no move to wake up. The two Konoha nin glanced around them surreptitiously, taking in the strange, cold brick and metal building they had been invited to. The four of them had entered through a side door leading to a desolate garden. Traces of fern and flora barely poking through the dusty gravel that seemed to bury what could have been a lush environment in the past. The sides of the building were liberally spread with corrugated aluminium divides, though the majority were showing signs of rust and decay. The room they had taken to was bare of anything besides a couple of plastic chairs, a naked bulb swinging lazily below the ceiling. Anko had noticed that many of the rooms they had passed on the way to their current residence were very similar in size and substance, if they had lights at all, that is. She shivered in the cold, the walls doing barely anything to inhibit the slight breeze whistling through the many gaps and holes peppering the building. She supposed that it would grow on her if she had to stay here every day, although whatever could convince her to return would have to be monumental to even be considered. She turned back to Mio, the girl smiling happily as she stared unwaveringly at their mutual acquaintance. A question came unbidden to her lips and she found herself opening her mouth without really meaning to. How long has you known him? Mio's head snapped to regard her, the tinge of joy gleaming through her features. About a year and a half, I guess. He stumbled in here around that time and one of the boys tried to beat him up. It didn't end well for that guy, ha ha ha. Anko smiled at that. She could just about see exactly how such a scene would have played out. You lot shinobi then? Takashi inquired anxiously. Anko has noticed that he seemed to be fidgeting ever since they'd set their friend down on his seat, as if he had some lingering doubt he was dying to have addressed. Shisui sighed tiredly. Yeah, we are. I take it the Hite gave it away, huh? Takashi snorted derisively. What would the tree huggers have to do with the Kazujin's leader, I wonder? Anko frowned. What was it with this guy? You mean he hasn't told you where he came from before you met him? Shisui thought aloud. No. Takashi's answer was a bit too snappish to not be suspicious. Shisui eyed the boy for a moment before addressing Mio. Well, to answer your question, he's one of our best friends. He was born and raised in Konoha. He left us 2 years ago for his own reasons and we've only just managed to track him down. Well, he obviously wants to stay here then, doesn't he? Takashi retorted waspishly. Anko glared at the boy. You say one more utterly stupid thing and I'll make sure you can't speak for the rest of our conversation. Better yet, get out of here, kid. You're obviously way too immature to be in on this. Takashi protested verbally before Mio told him to shut up and pushed him out the door, slamming it angrily after him. Sorry about him. He actually cares for Naruto quite a lot even if he pretends he really doesn't, Mio muttered. So why did Naruto leave in the first place? Anko and Shisui exchanged an uneasy glance. Things happened, and it was a little bit too much for him to take. He's had a hard life and the situation in Konoha. It's complicated, Shisui finished. Mio frowned, that really was very little information. 3 heads turned as a clear moan escaped the blonde's mouth from across the room. Anko rushed to his side and cradled his head to stop him from straining his neck from the strange position he found himself in. Oi Gaki. Wake the hell up. We've been looking all over for you, Yano? Naruto opened his eyes ever so slightly, blearily peering from under hooded lids at the room's occupants. He gave a startled flinch when he noticed just who was before him, his eyes snapping open so quickly that he almost fell from his chair at the pounding pain that flashed through his head. Anko ne. What are you doing here? Uck. His eyes widened comically as they lit upon a person he never thought he'd see again for the rest of his life. Shisui grinned back in typically cheesy fashion. Of course, his greeting was not at all what any of them suspected. Serious? What the hell are you doing here? I thought you fell through the veil. Naruto slumped to the side, head lolling after Shisui's cross-punch to the temple. Ignore that, he stated during a heavy moment of silence. Anko nodded vigorously to show her approval and Mio sighed exasperatedly. When he did regain consciousness for the second time, it was far more like the blonde than before. Shisui, what the hell? I thought you was dead, man. The chair shook for a moment before he glanced down at his bindings. Why the heck am I tied down? He asked slowly. Enko cackled with glee as Shisui squatted in front of their friend and patted his cheek. Oh, that's because we don't want you going insane on us like last time. Course, you're already insane, but we're trying to prevent any extra insanity, you see. Madness is bad for the heart and all that, especially when madness is already there and only increases. I think you made your point, Anko blurted. Naruto sat stunned, his eyes unable to leave the dark depths of his Sharingan-wielding brother. How? He asked, the single word carrying far more emotion than the others expected. Mio grimaced. I'll be outside, I suppose, she said, striding to the door, Bakken swinging haphazardly before opening and closing the door with a snap. Naruto hardly acknowledged her departure, such was his focus on his erstwhile friends. Shisui remained before him, features creasing into a soft smile at Naruto's concern. His hand trailed down to rest on the Jinchuriki's shoulder. Tsunade fixed me right up, Naruto. She's the best medic in the world for a reason. Squeezing his shoulder, he stood up and glanced down at the blonde. Don't get me wrong, it was a serious injury and nobody else could have healed me. That can't be right, cuz, he frowned, because she told me she'd fixed everything back then, but you just weren't waking up. He's right in front of you, Ruto, she smiled. That's good enough, isn't it? In a burst of wind chakra, the ropes surrounding him fell to the ground and he leapt forward in a rush, crushing Shisui in a bodily hug. The Uchiha survivor let out an exhilarating laugh, swinging his brother in all but blood around and around in the air. They calmed after a moment, Shisui setting Naruto down on his feet gently. Whoa, I guess, he paused to wipe his nose, I guess I missed so much, huh? Anko smiled. You did, but there's a lot of time to make up for it. Anko and Shisui glanced at each other worriedly when Naruto's face fell at her proclamation. What are you thinking, Naruto? There's no reason to not come back. The Sandaime wanted you in Konoha and I'm sure that hasn't changed, Shisui said, ever so softly. It's not that, Naruto shook his head, it's Madara, Madara's dead, Anko cut in. She recoiled at her own tone before continuing hesitantly. Like Orochimaru. We found his body halfway to the border with aim. Naruto collapsed, his legs giving out from under him. All this time, he'd been worrying all this time, justifying his self-imposed exile by the haunting words of a man who he'd killed by his own hands. He looked at them now, calloused and shaking as they were. His own hands. He looked up, catching the purple-haired Tokubetsu Junin's gaze with his own shimmering depths of azure. How, you killed him? Anko snapped. Madara and Orochimaru. Two of the most dangerous people in the entire world, Naruto. Why the hell are you running from your own damn ghosts? Naruto's eyes were wide, staring at her with something akin to shock, not that she noticed, however, she was too far caught within. Her ensnaring anger, the demons that had been seeking to tear her apart for 2 years, to stop anytime soon. You're one of the most freaking powerful kids in the world. Why the hell are you running away again and again? It's making me sick. She stopped to catch her breath, Shisui almost as surprised as the focus of her anger at her sudden outburst. Anko, I don't think. The hell you don't, she screamed. I've been all alone for 3 years, goddammit. You turned into some paranoid wacko. Kakashi was off trying to commit suicide and this guy. She rounded on him once again, eyes streaming with tears as her emotional turmoil, hidden for so long, finally rushed to the forefront as if a mighty dam had suddenly collapsed. But they never heard what she was going to say next, for before she could continue, her throat convulsed with a strangled sob, catching her unawares and bowing her head in her utter sorrow. If the room had been tense before, the awkwardness had now skyrocketed. Naruto, realizing suddenly what had happened during his absence as suddenly as a gust of wind steals your homework on a blustery day, cautiously approached his friend and hugged her. Anko continued to cry, huge gulps of air racking her body with tremors she hadn't felt since her abandonment in her teenage years. I missed you all so goddamn much, she wept. It was like those days before I got promoted. All my own. She gulped in another lungful of air as if it were her only hope. Every day, her head rose an inch, steel amethyst eyes glittering with unshed tears. Every damned day telling myself that it'd get better, that you'd come back. After an indefinite amount of time, Naruto wriggled to step back, somehow noticing that Shisui had appeared by his side rubbing circles into Anko's back. They parted uneasily, a small pink tinge washed over the tip of Anko's nose and cheeks. "Thanks," she murmured. They sat on the floor then, all three of them not knowing what to say and not wanting to be the first person to broach the silence after Anko's breakdown. Naruto, realizing how cold it was in the bare room, muttered as he drew his hands into seals and then finally snapping his hands forward and expelling a small fiery orange ball of flame that settled into the middle of the room and immediately causing the temperature to rise. Anko and Shisui stared at it for a moment before Shisui raised an eyebrow. "Do I want to know?" he asked. "I learnt that when I was staying here." "Neat trick, huh?" he grinned. "Pretty useful, I suppose," Anko whispered, rubbing her arms as if to trap the heat within them. After another moment of silence, all three burst out laughing for no apparent reason they could rationalize. And it was to this scene that Mio re-entered the room. "Everything okay now?" She prodded gently, closing the door with her foot as her hands were full with a tray of juice and onigiri. "Just peachy, Mio," Naruto replied. "Good," she said. "We were wondering if it'd take a fight before you all shut up," ignoring the glares sent her way, doing nothing to deter the full-blown smile upon her lips. "You're going back to Konoha," she remarked, stabbing a finger in Naruto's direction. "Huh? Wah. No buts, I didn't even say but," Naruto complained. "You were thinking it?" "That wasn't even a question. Well done, you've proven you can talk." "Mio," Naruto growled. "I will decide whatever the hell I want to do. You," he began, jabbing his own finger at her face, "will simply have to accept it." Her smile only widened if that was possible. "I know that. Everyone wants you to go though. A lot of us have noticed that your focus is never with the Kazejin even since you formed us up." Naruto looked down guiltily. "It's not my fault, Mio. I want to stay, I really do. It's been really cool with you, Takashi and the others." Shisui leaned forward, a somber expression on his face. "That's one of the reasons we came to get you actually. We know this was your choice and we respect that and would have left you alone however long you wanted," he said, ignoring the sharp glare Anko sent his way. "What are you talking about?" Naruto asked, thoroughly confused. "It's Kakashi. He's trying to kill himself." "You didn't tell us you were staying with someone else," Shisui said over the streaming wind as they flew through the trees at a breakneck speed. "We would have given you a bit more time to say goodbye." "Well, I would have anyway," he said, shooting a glare at Anko's grin on his other side. Naruto waved off his concern as he positioned himself for another jump, springing nimbly from a branch that whipped up in front of him. "No worries. Ji-san took me in after I landed on his doorstep. I was bleeding out my ears after the fight with Madara and I didn't know he was dead. Didn't want to take the chance of him being alive and getting to me before I managed to get out of the area." He glanced up at the clouded sky, pondering the last few years of his life, wondering how fickle his existence was. He never understood how he ended up where he ended up. He'd never even considered leaving Konoha for such an extended period of time, nor meeting such a diverse range of people as he did in Mori. It was better for him than he could ever admit aloud. "So what was his name? That old guy, I mean," Anko inquired after he shot her a confused look. "Oh, well, I dunno actually." Anko gaped at him. "You lived with the guy for over 2 years and never asked him what his name was." Naruto sighed. "It's not as simple as that, Anko-ne. Gigi can't speak. He can't write either, otherwise I would have asked him," he said, scratching his leg. Idly, his sweatshirt rippling over his chest as the air caught within its voluminous length. "Oh," she responded after a pregnant silence. Shisui held up a hand and all three landed in a small clearing devoid of grass. In fact, it appeared as if the ground had been forcibly smoothed at some point in the past. The soil was soft but not damp, free of rock and grain, yet a few weeds had begun to grow around it, shaping an almost perfect oval ringed by trees. It was a beautiful spot, a sense of tranquility spreading through the soft sway of green around it coupled with the scent of fresh, damp pine wafting through the air. "We'll stop here for the night. As it is, we're ahead of Kakashi anyway. We'll move out in the morning and hope to be there by mid-afternoon." Hopefully that idiot is as cautious as always and is still scoping the place out. Shisui huffed and began pulling his storage scrolls from the small pouch slung on a strap over his shoulder. Naruto couldn't break the feeling of déjà vu. The makeshift camp reminded him of something in his memory, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. "I've been here before," he muttered. Anko's head swiveled to look in his direction, a strange look spreading across her features. "You probably have. We're on the border to Kusa," and then it was Naruto's turn with a shocked expression. "But he's dead, Naruto. What do you think happened to his base after that? We've been getting job requests all year for Nuke Nin popping up all over the country." Naruto glanced at her, trying to gauge her reaction to his realization, but she sighed and looked away, her eyes glazing over ever so slightly. "Can't fault you, kiddo. You stomped him into the ground and I am happy for that. Orochimaru was a monster. I guess I wanted to do it with my own hands 'cause of how much he hurt me back." Then, she sighed. "It's selfish, I know, he's hurt so many other people too, and it ain't my right to do it, but we should just be happy Killer B was around. If he didn't have Sylvana with him, the snake would have gotten away again," Shisui growled, his eyes flashing in anger. He was asleep. When all the crap went down, he had to be in a damned coma of all things. The trio busied themselves with laying out their sleeping bags. Naruto's a dull orange with blue panda bears decorating its tubular surface. Anko couldn't help cracking a grin, before all three fell into peals of laughter, holding their sides collapsed on the ground. When they finally settled, warm gazes almost setting each other off once again, Anko spoke up, her throat trembling with suppressed mirth. "You know, Jiraiya told me about Orochimaru. Some of the things I didn't know, but I realized he and Sandaime-sama used to tease each other over all the time." She stared into the flames that Shisui belatedly lit in the middle of the campsite. "Huh, more like Jiraiya always tried to bring it up, but old Sarutobi always threatened him if he didn't shut up." "What was it?" Naruto asked, curiosity shining in his vivid blue eyes. Anko dissolved into another set of giggles just at the thought of what she was about to say. After a few moments of silence broken only by her laughter and the other two's amused glances, she started up again haltingly. Remember how Jiraiya would always bring up that thing about a tiger?" At Naruto's nod, she continued. "Haha, well, turns out Sarutobi was teaching his team anatomy and, well." She broke off once again, her elbows tucked around her as she gasped for breath. "Sorry, it's just so funny." She idly wiped a couple of stray tears from her eyelashes, the pearly droplets glittering in the glow of the campfire as they fell to the ground. Basically, they strung up and skinned a tiger they caught on one of their missions whilst Sandaime-sama pointed out all the different organs and bones and stuff. He was discussing some really complex blood vessels and he and Orochimaru got drawn into a debate about the arteries running to the back two legs. They decided to test who was right and Orochimaru pulled out a kunai and went to cut into it. She looked around, barely holding in her cackles at the other two. "He missed the right place and ended up slicing a more disgusting area, I guess." She chuckled again, her voice going hoarse from her continued hysterics. She almost burst as dawning realization, almost odd horror, and then an absolute priceless look of morbid glee flittered over Shisui's face. "You mean, exactly? They ended up spattered in white gunk. It even went in their mouths. 'Cause they were so shocked at what he'd done." And then she lost it, her and Shisui rolling around on the ground as the full meaning of what she just said began to take root in Naruto's younger mind. "Oh my god, that is disgusting." And just like that, Shisui set Naruto off as well. A few minutes later, they somehow lay side by side staring up into the canopy, the twinkling stars almost visible through the almost misty cloud cover. "I never got to say sorry to him, you know?" Naruto whispered. Shisui laid an arm over his shoulders, the three of them just reveling in the comfort of each other's presence. "At least you were there, Naruto. I didn't even get to see him before he died. He lived a long life at the top of his game. He was possibly the most accomplished shinobi ever to live. I can't mourn his passing knowing what I do. It'd disrespect my memory of him." Shisui never once took his eyes from Naruto's as he spoke, compassion aglow, even in the smoldering black of his irises. "Yeah," Naruto responded, grief thickening his tongue. Both were snapped from their ensuing funk as well-honed reflexes brought their arms up to catch the two ball-like objects striking their faces. "Oh, Stop moping around, you bry babies, Anko remarked annoyingly. Get something in your stomach and then get some sleep. Naruto looked down at the strange-looking fruit he now held. It was colored with a radial gradient, blue and gray mixing in the most unnatural ways. He squeezed it lightly within his palm, feeling the squishy flesh beneath the thing's skin against his fingers. What the heck is this thing? He asked. No idea. Picked it up in the forest along the way. At least it's food. Shisui glanced at his own skeptically. I don't think you're entirely sure about that yourself, Anko, he remarked. Course I am. And with that, she took a huge bite with an echoing crunch, something that caused Naruto to wince for some reason. Gut reaction, he reasoned. Within a few moments, something very weird began to happen. The phenomenon was known as a drugged Mitarashi Anko. The only sign that anything was wrong was the sudden slackening of her shoulders as she belly flopped upon the leafy ground. Anko ne, I am so not eating this, but it ish deli show us, Ruto. She slurred, her eyes dilating as she squinted to take him in. If you say so, he muttered, considering her with a frown. Shisui tossed his into the bushes around the clearing. I didn't know fruit could be drugged. First time for everything, huh? He said. Naruto nodded before having to tackle Anko to the ground since she was trying to undress for a reason known only to her. Ruto, jar off me, she shouted. Not until you calm down, he shot back. Senjoshu, she declared, her arms swinging wildly around beneath his weight. Naruto yelped as a trio of snakes slithered lazily down her arms before he realized that the effects of the fruit seemed to be carried over to them. The snakes flopped languidly to the ground, their eyeballs flitting around without focusing on anything. Right, Naruto said, I've had enough. And at Shisui's raised eyebrow, he slammed a fist into the back of his friend's neck, causing her to collapse, unconscious. Well, that's one way to do it, I suppose, Shisui said. Oh, thanks for your help, Uchiha genius. At the lauded Shinkaru's affronted look, Naruto slid into his sleeping bag and turned over for the night, a smile already stretched across his face. He wouldn't say it, but he'd be lying if he said he hadn't missed this. Morning dawned beautifully. There was something to be said about Naruto's frame of mind in recent years. He began to relish the simpler things in life. People who'd known him would say that was always the case for the blonde bundle of energy of the past, but Naruto had really begun to realize just how vast and awe-inspiring the real world was. As the sun peaked the horizon, its rays flushing the fields of grass. With a hazy glow that shone with such luster that he was dazzled, he watched from the seated position in his rapidly warming sleeping bag. It was crazy, he decided, how humans could mess up everything so easily when the world went round and round without fail, never once breaking from its God-given pattern. Shisui had awoken before him and had already set about clearing up the area. He doused the fire last night to allow them a comfortable sleep. Rice country grew humid at this time of year and they would have sweat buckets if he'd left it to burn till its embers. Anko, however, was still snoring softly, and he wondered if she'd been cured of the drugged fruit over the course of her sleep. Speak of the devil. Was it, mornin'? She whined, still half asleep even though the sun was very much in her eyes. That's what generally happens every 24 hours, Anko. Get up, we need to move out as soon as we can, Shisui said whilst stuffing the last of his supplies into a small camping bag. The trio rose lazily, eating breakfast in the swaying breeze beneath the canopy of trees to the south of their encampment. Once they'd finished and were suitably rested, Shisui slapped a hastily drawn map in front of them and they gathered round with grim determination. Okay, so Canopy Bridge. Kakashi's likely point of insertion was to the east, as that's the only route the Konoha border is open to. Danzo would never choose brains over a shorter mission time if he could help it. Anko frowned. This is Kakashi we're talking about. Knowing him, he probably disregarded anything Danzo said if he could think of something better. True, Shisui nodded. However, given what we know of his state of mind, I don't think he'll be doing that for this mission. Anko shrugged, a pensive expression settling upon her soft features. Naruto, in the last 2 years since Killer Bee disposed of Orochimaru, his underlings have gone off radar. There have been mass breakouts of Nuke Nin from all over the world forming into their own small groups and causing havoc wherever they please. The high no. Kuni Intelligence Division has been prioritizing the removal of the Konoha nin in relation to this situation, and Kakashi's been hunting them down for the last 6 months or so. Naruto nodded to show he understood. Shisui took it as his sign to continue. We're talking along the lines of 3 to 4 A-class nuke nin here. We're not sure if they were the butt of one or more of Orochimaru's depraved human experimentation, so their actual fighting level we don't know. Stabbing his finger at the 2 circled areas around what could only be described as a bridge's ruins drawn by hand, Shisui looked up seriously. Those are the locations of the most likely position that the Intelligence Division expected them to be camped out at. They've been attacking the town close by using hit-and-run tactics for almost a month now. The mayor came to Fire Country's council to request samurai involvement, but the cads up there obviously thought it was too low for them and shifted it to Konoha instead. This means that Kakashi was sent solo with our forces stretched thin as they are. The Uchiha survivor ran a gloved hand through his hair, glaring hard at his own map for a moment. Look, I'm not sure how much Kakashi's told you about his past. I mean, I wouldn't even know had I not been drafted into the Anbu selection process when he was coming down from his prime. Kanabi Bridge it's very important to him, I suppose. He shifted uneasily, playing on the edges of his Hittite. Where his old team lost Obito, you mean? Anko blurted out before looking away guiltily. Yeah, my oldest cousin died there back then. It's where he got his Sharingan. It was the last time the old Team 7 was together. He closed his eyes wearily. All I'm saying is, just be prepared that. Kakashi went off knowing this was a suicide mission. What he meant went unsaid. Shisui and Anko found their gazes straying to the youngest member of their group. His eyes far off in the distance, considering something neither could fathom. A tense silence fell upon them as they unconsciously waited for his reaction. Naruto blinked languidly before staring at the two in surprise. What? He said. Shisui grinned. What were you thinking just now? You lose some things, you gain some things, right? He smiled, though there was little humor written in it. If he's feeling all lonely 'cause his first family's gone, well, that's what the second family's for, right? You do know you say, right, and, see, way too many times to be normal? Anko elbowed him in the ribs. Yeah, you're such an uneducated brat. What did we spend all that time teaching you for? Shisui chided as he put the young blonde in a headlock. Naruto shook himself out of their teasing and turned to them. I think we'd better leave before Kashi does something stupid, he suggested. Oh wow, when did you grow a brain? Unlike you, Anko nay, I don't need Dango to replace what's already there, he said with a deadpan voice. Shisui laughed heartily at her indignant squawk as the trio set out to save the last of their group. Perhaps the hardest thing in life is to accept something that you have never seen. It was funny, Kakashi had pondered, just how strange those sorts of experiences were, whether it were trusting the word of someone you loved, friends or family, all the way up to religious people believing in God. People had looked up at the sky and thought, hey, maybe there's something up there, something bigger and more complex than this world we live in, even though they couldn't see it, or better yet, even have any proof in support of such a notion. Life for a shinobi was always the same. After 10 years of patrols, assassinations, ambassadorial roles and the like, each mission devolved into another monotonous routine. It was probably the biggest reason for a promising ninja's stagnation, reliance on certain techniques that begin to form their only techniques. A shinobi became defined by his own routine, his own choice of ninjutsu, even though that wasn't necessarily all there was to him. How many of the 1,000 jutsu Sarutobi Hiruzen had known had he actually used? How many had Kakashi used for that matter? All those memorized since Obito had cursed him with his Sharingan. It was hard to disassociate the reality one lives to the utopia one believes in. Kakashi had begun to realize this. His utopia had been one with his friends in it, living by the ideologue, the modus operandi Minato-sensei had bequeathed to him. Team 7 were a tight-knit group upon Uchiha Obito's demise, and Kakashi knew not what path he would have followed if he had remained standing to this day. He glanced down at the map in his lap, booted feet crossed beneath him. He had no luggage, no equipment save for what he held on his person. His most precious belonging rested on his back, the blade passed down to him from his father, one that had broken and reformed. Danzu's orders were crazy, he knew that, they always were, and yet he hardly cared that he was a walking occupational hazard at that moment. Canopy Bridge, how he hated that name. And yet, he was somehow, inexorably drawn to it like a moth to flame. He couldn't explain it, yet he knew unconsciously that his life would end there, just as Sharingan no Kakai's had begun. He stood gracefully, folding the map into the flap of his hip pouch, pausing only to sip at his water bottle and quench his seemingly parched throat. It had been like that ever since he'd heard of this mission, and no amount of liquid could stop the feeling of thirst at the very core of his being. It was mid-afternoon, long grass and swaying stalks surrounding him in a heady embrace of nature's smell. He stole cat-like, through the trees, his eyes seeking out the landmarks only he could find. The only other two who would have recognized them were dead. Mud turned to murky water, foliage to rock as his memories finally overtook him once again. He stopped on the edge of a cave, the whole structure having collapsed years ago. It was here that his mind led him, it was here that he had begun. With morbid curiosity, he began to dig. His intelligent mind recoiled at what his heart was pushing him to do, yet he could not stop. He struggled onwards, overturning huge boulders sunk deep into the crevices of the earth that the Iwa Nin had made all those years ago. And finally, he reached the bottom, his eyes hungrily taking in the rocky terrain that had been his brother's grave. At some point his Hite had slipped from his forehead and the cloth lay pooled at his feet, exposing the eye he had inherited. There was nothing there, predictably, time having disposed of fragments of bone and living flesh due to the pressure from above. If he looked hard enough, he could just about make out the faint traces of dried blood, the vicinity having preserved it in the moisture of underground havens. Or maybe that was his mind's eye playing tricks on him. Having fun digging up your friend's remains? Someone chortled from behind him. He neither cared, nor wanted to face him. Why would he? It was futile in the end, wasn't it? Ah, this is boring, Gen-san. Can't we just kill him and get out of here? It's hot as a beach out here, another voice whined. Irakuro Gen, his mind supplied one of his mission's targets. A class nuke nin, though his exact origins were unknown. He was likely an AIM defector, joining Orochimaru's forces only to be stabbed in the back and used as a prison guard or test subject. Abilities were unknown. Kakashi glanced up slowly, his eye twitching slightly as the sun streamed through the trees, painting the gray backdrop of stone a whitewashed color with a hint of the pasture that had surrounded the place in days bygone. Even the dirty water, the swirling, grit-filled bog, glittered merrily, basking in weather's glory. Only one thought passed through his strangely silent mind: it was a good place to die. And so he turned, casting off the shackles of his past, the melancholy of his present and the nightmares of his future. He turned slowly, his hand unsheathing the white fang with an ethereal sliding of metal. The edge shone with unblunted luster, the weight as light as his heart. And the fight began. It was inevitable that he would lose this battle, he knew, whether he was referring to his life as a whole, or the events surrounding the moment. Yet in the days of his movements, the roar of his flame, the crackle of his lightning, the thud of his stone or the swish of his metal, he barely registered the fact that his sword left a shimmering white trail of pure chakra in the wake of its slice, gutting the first through the neck, the second through the bowel. He spun, light as a feather, his palm barely touching the ground before it tore a trench a meter wide before him. He hadn't felt the lance of electricity lodge in his left shoulder, his arm hanging limp thereafter. He hadn't felt the chakra bomb that had thrown him through two trees either, his eyes fixed on his opponents but nowhere at all. And as he flipped forwards into a forward roll to avoid a boulder careening for his head, he recognized the seals placed on the outcrop he had alighted on. Explosive seals, primed and trigger controlled. His death foretold, he had already accepted it, maybe as Naruto's eyes had widened that day on the roof of Hokage Tower. Maybe he had known that the chance that had presented itself, a family after a family, was his last one he would ever have the opportunity of taking. And as the seals lit up in a beautiful pattern of golden swirls, the intricacies of the seal blending over as the power grew within them, he knew the truth that he had so long turned his back on. You only realize the blessing of what you once had when it is taken away from you. Yet it was not to be. He was jerked back furiously by a force so strong that it totally enclosed him from the ensuing blast that tore through stone like a hot knife through butter. His hair burnt at their ends, curls of smoke. Rising from his charred clothing, he rolled and rolled, his energy spent before a small, strong hand grasped him by the nape of his neck and hauled him bodily upwards. What the hell, man? Were you trying to die? Golden hair swinging in the wind, gray fatigues with a blue, worn t-shirt. Cerulean eyes that had no depth. It was like looking into the past. How far back you go is up to you. Take it easy, man, we got ya. Those guys aren't getting out of there alive, the voice said exultantly. He recognized it, he was sure, but it couldn't tell him who it was. Pain began to cloud his senses, the preceding fog conquered by currents of agony as his wounds finally caught up to him. His vision flickered, a huge mushroom-shaped explosion tearing through the area, ferocious winds throwing his head back like a rag doll. He idly realized he'd been placed in a sort of groove within the ruins of the bridge, raised from the ground, affording a good view of the area. A jolt of pain so strong sharpened his mental faculties and he managed to see through the vapid mist clouding his senses for a brief moment. Just in time too. Naruto's fist swung, so fast it appeared to disappear in mid-arc only for the final nuke nin to scream in unadulterated pain as he was struck cleanly through, cracking rib bones and squelching flesh. He struck so hard and fast, that even though half his arm passed right through the man, the now limp body was thrown dizzyingly into the wreckage of a beam of the once proud bridge. Alas, his neck, mind and eyes could take no more and he slipped into the unending bliss of sleep. Time passed fuzzily for Kakashi after that. He had vague moments of awareness, lying down beside the heat of a fire, movement as the team moved from one area or the next. It took him 3 days to become lucid enough and understand the messages his faculties were sending him. He came to very much in the heart of High no Kuni. If he looked hard enough, he could just make out the spire that was the entrance of the Information Exchange Bureau. He was somehow back to Konoha, a place he thought he'd never see again, but he could see now, really see. The mists that seemed to hold back his senses for so long had disappeared. He couldn't tell someone when it was the last time that he could feel in such way. And what a feeling! His mind was ablaze, his skin tingling as if every single neuron in his body were firing at random intervals. It was a nice feeling to see. Awake again, huh? Stay with us for more than 2 minutes, will ya, Kashi? His head turned ever so slowly, his neck hurting from disuse. Naruto. He rasped, his dry lips sliding roughly over one another. Yo, Sharingman. He raised his hand in greeting. You're back, he croaked slowly. He was almost blinded by the smile he received in return. Yup. Right back where it started, man. I reckon I gotta do what Gigi asked me to, ya know. Kakashi could only stare disbelievingly as he tried to comprehend his statement. Then, he could barely contain the hope that seeped into his voice. Naruto's countenance darkened considerably. The blonde stood, and Kakashi realized he'd grown in the years they'd been apart. His wiry frame was still slim, not healthy in anyone's eyes, and yet he had a strength about him, a power that attracted people, more so than Kakashi had even felt from the Yondaime. That sucker's gonna die. I'm gonna gut him myself, he said with such conviction that Kakashi realized just who he was referring to. Danzu's days were numbered. In fact, Kakashi hazarded the guess that he wouldn't last till tomorrow. What would come, would come. He felt empty of the negative emotions, the sadness of his past was gone. He breathed in deeply, only to cough at his parched throat. But it was there, the light airy feeling of release. His demons were gone. Maybe he had to accept them first before they would leave. Maybe he had to die to be born again, and Kakashi would do that. He was already born anew. And so we close the book on this chapter of the saga. It was important for Kakashi to escape the clutches of his past. Things were boiling over with him for too long, like a kettle that would eventually explode if you covered its spout. There's some very heavy foreshadowing in this chapter. I won't say anything, but read it as you will. Fiction has an amazing aspect in that every reader reads it differently. Every individual can draw their own conclusions, and that's half the fun of writing. And so with these half-truths and hints at more to come, we move back to Konoha and the meat of the storyline. That said, I've got a HPFIC prologue cooking, and you might have a chance to peruse it in the coming weeks. Once again, apologies for the atrocious review replies, especially to Dear Jolteon Forever. I do read all of them, and I hope you can continue to support me and offer your help whenever you feel the need. So enjoy, and hopefully the next one will be out far quicker than this. Mega B all change, please, Konoha. At his fingertips by Mega B. Chapter 4. All change, please. Schizophrenia. A long-term mental disorder of a type involving a breakdown in the relation between thought, emotion, and behavior, leading to faulty perception, inappropriate actions and feelings. Withdrawal from reality and personal relationships into fantasy and delusion, and a sense of mental fragmentation. That was what the doctors had said at Konoha Central Hospital, but he couldn't reconcile the words they were telling him with who he was and the amazing achievements of his past. He had been the one to pull the great nation of fire from the jaws of the tiger, crushing the opposition in aim and reducing Kumogakure to their proverbial knees. He had just had a bad day, that was all. His shinobi were avoiding him. He'd woken up in a strange position and he had a funny feeling that the water beneath him was a urine sample, though how that had gotten all the way to Hokage Tower in one piece only to smash on his person, he had no idea. And now, sitting up in a lonely bleach white room with root agents posted outside, he had time to ponder on the perpetrators of his sudden paranoia. He was twitchy, jumping at the slightest noises. His eyes traveled from the single green door to the clear windows and back again, constantly shifting, wondering which avenue his phantasmagorical enemy would burst in to claim his prestigious soul. He gave a start. Maybe they wouldn't come from either, maybe they'd use far less conventional means. What would he do in this situation? He laboriously rose from the bed to check beneath it. He shifted around the room, pulling his analysis machinery with him as he opened the small door to the ensuite bathroom. After unscrewing every lid on every bottle within and laying them on the sink counter, he ambled back out into the room and peered blearily around. This could not be. Something was wrong. He was sure he was being watched, especially after that dream he'd had. Yes, that absolutely terrifying dream where Uchiha Itachi himself had come back to Konoha acting as if he were an Anbu captain. It was fishy, so very fishy. He glanced at the ceiling and a glinting metal grill caught his eye. Of course, he crowed mentally, maintenance shafts would be the best place a would-be assassin could lie in wait to assassinate the most important of targets. How had he not thought of it before? As he pulled a chair beneath the cover and pulled himself up, groaning as the needles attached to his body became taut and pulled his skin painfully, the afternoon nurse stepped through the door. "Danzo-sama. Whatever are you doing? Come down from there at once. You should be in bed," she said. Silence. Insufferable woman. Have you no idea that an enemy shinobi may be trying to kill me as I rest? Where are my guards? He spat, spittle rolling off his lips. The nurse winced, disgusted at the man's behavior, but she would not have her patient acting like this. Either you get down from there or I shall let Dr. Inoue know that you will require another week to recover. His guards entered the room in confusion, drawn to the angry voices warring with each other within. Excellent. Guards, detain this woman. She is no doubt an enemy spy, determined to distract me so that her compatriots can murder me when my back is turned. It was a testament to their sheer emotionless personalities that they stopped themselves from glancing at one another in bewilderment. Godem-sama, Hikari-san is the afternoon nurse in charge of your ward, the one on the right murmured. Hikari, you say? I once had a son named similar, or was it my daughter? And as the old man trailed off with his inane mutterings, the three managed to coerce him back to ground level. Hikari stood massaging her nose at the headache dealing with the man had brought. Look, would you take a walk in the yard or something? Rest your head and calm your nerves. When you come back, we'll see about getting your next dose of medication. You too, she ordered, pointing at the Nei operatives. Take Danzo-sama with you and make sure he doesn't come back until he's calm. Rotating on the spot, she stormed from the room, leaving the door open behind her. This time, the two shinobi did look to each other for guidance. One shrugged and the other took it as his clue to gently guide the hobbling man out the door and down the corridor with his teammate unobtrusively bringing up the rear. When they stepped outside, the glorious sunshine striking their bodies with an energetic warmth only it could provide, Danzo began to fret with greater anxiety before. His eyes began to shake, zipping around the greenery, focusing on every possible hiding space that occurred to him. He gave a great shout and pointed to a bush off to their right, only to turn and repeat the same action in another direction. The two root members began to sweat. They had always had problems dealing with their psychotic leader before, but this was on a far greater level than they'd ever experienced. Something must have happened to him when he collapsed that day, or perhaps he was simply building up to this point all these years. One of the agents was forced to gallop around the small garden, checking under branches, scraping back leaves and pulling up roots, ironically enough, all the while searching for non-existent antagonists that only Danzo could see. But like a loyal soldier, he bore the strain and kept at it for the mental stability of his leader. Danzo was perspiring heavily, his eyes bloodshot and his tongue almost hanging from his mouth as he panted. He was squinting hard every which way, unable to identify the information his mind was telling him. His heart was sounding in his ears and ringing throughout his mind. Surely it was a genjutsu. He had never felt like this before, but it seemed as if an expert practitioner of the mental arts had grasped him under his thumb. Gentlemen, it seems as if we are under a powerful illusion. We must prevent this threat at all costs. He shouted the last bit as if it would frighten his imagined opponents away. Hokage-sama, I don't think anyone. That is exactly what they would have you believe, he hissed. I want you to spread out and find the one who has set up such an elaborate trap. See if he would like to join us. I always value strength such as this. The agents hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether to convince their leader that it was all in his mind, but their training won out and they dispersed, secretly relieved to no longer be in his presence. Danzo sighed heavily, though he still felt odd. He was happy that his men were working to solve it. You could never know if even they weren't compromised. He was better off on his own for the moment, and then he felt it. Chakra surged through the air, diffusing heavily, throwing a huge blanket over his already troubled mind. He suddenly found it very hard to breathe, almost wanting to fall to the ground in fatigue. His breath came harder and faster, his eyes blurring even more than before. His heartbeat thumped erratically as he hobbled frantically, searching for the power surge's epicenter. His back became bent as the pressure grew, his stomach turning nauseously. Something exploded about a half-mile away and a shout rose up, so terrible and haunting, a cry of a wolf seeking the prey who killed his children. His eyes widened to impossible proportions, his eyeballs trembling in abject terror. He turned and began to limp as fast as he could for the door back to the hospital. He had to reach it, reach the safety of the indoors. Just get away from this rabid thing that was after him. He'd survived far worse, hadn't he? He'd survived 2 shinobi wars. He could survive this. This was nothing. This was nothing. The wall behind him exploded. A violent burst of brick and mortar catapulting through the air like a chakra bomb had detonated on the other side. The shockwave rippled outwards, throwing him to the ground as pebbles and cement shrapnel bounced off his trembling body. He felt his bowel loosen, and in that moment he realized that maybe that water hadn't been a urine sample, perhaps it had been his own excrement like it was now. Through the smoke strode the very devil himself. The 9-tailed fox, the Kyuubi no Yuko, the demon with no peer. But no, he counted only 5 tails, but that was enough. The idiot child who the Yondaime had foolishly sealed it into had no doubt allowed the seal to be broken and it was unleashed upon the world once more, its tails whipped about its head, red as blood, its coat shimmering like 1,000 stars in a massacred sky. Steam rose from an open mouth, to which shining canines honed to their very points were revealed. But the eyes were the worst, for there were no eyes. Only empty, soulless white orbs that seemed to take in every lie, every failure that he had ever committed. No, stay away from me. Freak. Monster. I am the Hokage, he cried, his voice rattling with intense fear. Yet the beast strode forward. A clawed hand, he thought it looked like a hand, or was it a paw, reached out towards him. He scrabbled backwards, trying to put as much space between himself and the nightmare that stood before him. Danzo, the thing whispered, and its whisper was worse than its shout. You have one chance to tell me why the hell you sent Kakashi to die. The man could only whimper, pitifully. Naruto's anger skyrocketed and the Kyuubi's coat rippled in response, its color becoming closer to black than red. Chakra was pouring from him like a never-ending ocean. The grass began to wilt, the trees shrivel. The entire area was as silent as a graveyard, and Danzo didn't even begin to wonder where his shinobi were nor the hospital staff. His eyes could only linger on the crumbled debris that used to be a wall and the dangerously sharp teeth and claws of the animal facing him. Aye. Then you die, it said. His heart stopped. Danzo's shuddering eyes and body became still in rigor mortis and his elbow collapsed from under him causing him to fall to the ground. There were a few small popping sounds, and suddenly, his bandages began to bulge with spherical-shaped protrusions. To say Naruto was shocked was an understatement. All his anger left him in one great rush, leaving him staring, disbelievingly, at the dead body of a man lying in his own, foul ordure. He immediately gagged at the smell and covered his mouth and nose with his t-shirt. Naruto. What happened? Anko shouted as she landed beside him, Kakashi leaning on Shisui's shoulder as they two approached. I actually have no clue, he pointed. One moment, I'm screaming at him, and the next, he just plops over like that. Shisui nudged Anko forward, and she stepped cautiously up to the old man's body, scowling at the Uchiha all the while. She touched a steel-plated toe to his chest. He's dead, she deadpanned. I can't believe it. He's actually dead. Are you sure you only shouted at him? Shisui asked, glancing at Naruto dubiously. Of course I'm sure. He argued hotly. I didn't even touch him. This is Nami no Kuni all over again. Nami no Kuni? Shisui asked. Naruto groaned. Back when I went around the ninja countries. I went to wave and suddenly, somehow, I ended up stabbing this guy and killing him. He was all evil and stuff, so no worries. You suddenly ended up stabbing someone, Shisui repeated faintly. Oi, what's going on here? A blond man rushed up to them, two others following close behind. Inoichi, ain't that Danzo? The fat one asked. I think it is, the lazy one replied, intelligent eyes fixed on the body. Yo, Shuza, Shikaku, Anko greeted. Anko. The blonde nodded before turning to the other three. Shisui, Kakashi-san. Oh my. Is that? Shuza started. It is. Shikaku shouted joyously in recognition. Naruto. Inoichi screamed as he tackled the teenager. His two teammates began to laugh boisterously, eyes shining happily as they came up to him, alternately hugging him and slapping his back. And then suddenly, they were surrounded by a deluge of human bodies, cheering and chanting his name as if he were Namikaze Minato himself. You came back. A woman cried. I always knew you would. You see that, Hucho? You see that? I was right all this time. Naruto-kun is made of stronger stuff than most. The crowd pressed in, the dead body forgotten, and Shisui smiled wryly. It was a testament to just how badly Danzo had led the village that nobody even cared that he was dead. He glanced around idly. It was odd that Root was nowhere to be seen, however. Surely they'd be out for Naruto's blood right now. He shook his head, ignoring his thoughts. The villagers had begun to celebrate in their jubilation, throwing their hands in the air and hugging each other close. It was the Kyuubi's defeat all over again, except without the muted tones of loss and despair tainting the mood. And then the crowd split in half, almost like a huge boulder pushed into the middle of a fast-flowing river. And down the aisle strode the determined forms of Senju Tsunade and Jiraiya, the two most respected shinobi of the village. They stopped a few meters from the four, Tsunade slightly ahead, Jiraiya smiling crazily. But Naruto did not see him. He only had eyes for his pseudo-grandmother. She regarded him grimly, her expression stony, and suddenly the crowd was silent. It was as if they had never been there. A breeze played through the tightly packed bodies, catching the woman's blonde pigtails and sending them fluttering, along with her coat-tails, in the wind. And they were suddenly crushing each other. In a bone-breaking embrace, tears falling, unchecked, from her eyes, his own lip wobbling dangerously. Don't you ever, ever, do that again, she whispered through gritted teeth. Never, never again. Naruto found himself nodding, afraid that if he said anything, sobs would be quick to follow. The crowd started up again, their noise even louder than before, many crying at the touching scene they were witnessing. Jiraiya approached them, slinging a single arm over the two hugging people and grinning lopsidedly. You so came back at a bad time, kiddo. Danzo is. He froze as Anko gestured towards the side of the hospital, funnily enough, which had the doctors and nurses, the injured patients, all hanging from windows and balconies and cheering along with the crowd. Jiraiya smiled, and it was a demented smile. Kakashi and Shisui shivered at that smile. It was vindictive. Oh ho 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 ho. He laughed, striding up to the body. Look what we have here. Oh my god. Danzo is dead. He screeched before dissolving into bouts of uncontrollable mirth. I swear I didn't kill him. I just shouted at him a bit, for sending Kakashi on a suicide mission and he just falls over and Enko says he's dead. It's not my fault, Naruto said hurriedly, but Jiraiya blew him off. Ah, don't worry about a thing Gaki. He got what was coming to him. He glared down at the body, all happiness disappearing. He had a lot to answer for. To be honest, we're all better off without him. But, Jiraiya shouted, quieting the crowd, whoever shall be Hokage now. And another great cry went up, shouts and chants of Naruto erupting from all around. Naruto stood stock still, Tsunade's arms still around him. It was like being underwater. He could hear, but he couldn't quite hear all the same. His brain refused to believe what his ears were telling him. Jiraiya faced him. His friends faced him. Even Tsunade loosened her hold to grant him a watery smile. Looks like that's settled then, Jiraiya whispered, and even though it was said so quietly, it had an odd finality about it. As time passed and Naruto took to meeting everyone, shaking their hands and apologizing profusely for leaving for all the time he did, Kakashi, Enko and Shisui looked on with pride. He's just like his father, Kakashi murmured, causing the other two to start. He pulls people to him without meaning to. He could try to kill someone and they'd still end up being his greatest friend. Enko snorted happily. I always knew it. From the moment he hit me with that rock and landed me in the hospital, Shisui smiled. It's things like these that make me want to stay in Konoha, ya know? Enko muttered and the other two nodded. He's the thing keeping us together. Even now, when I thought I had nothing left, he came back and pulled us back in like we're all tied to his strings, Kakashi said thoughtfully. Enko quirked an eyebrow. That's a really bad way of putting it. But true, Shisui acknowledged. Haha, don't I know it, Enko said, a single tear slipping from her right eye. At the back of the crowd, a group of Chunin stood. Their ex-teammate, brown hair strung up in buns on either side of her head, spun on her heel and slipped away, a melancholic smile vying with wet trails upon her cheeks. So let me get this straight, Naruto said incredulously. I'm the Hokage, right? As in, the leader of this village? Hokage Tower's secretary, a has-been 20-something going by the name of Hirano Ren appeared equal parts flustered and awed to be in the presence of such a young, albeit troublesome Hokage. Yes, she replied hesitantly. Naruto nodded encouragingly. Doesn't that mean I'm like, the strongest guy here? Well no, not necessarily, but it means you were chosen for the post because you were a better candidate than anyone else and held the most characteristics we would need, she answered, still not sure where the blonde was going with this. Exactly. And you expect me to go through this, every day? Naruto exclaimed with obvious disgust as he pointed at the towering pile of paperwork precariously balanced at the edge of the Sandame's large oak table. That's only the morning's load, Hokage-sama. It's important that the right answers are given to the right people. Ren was obviously sweating at this point. How about this? I'm the Hokage, and I'm saying you should do it. How long have you been here for again? What? But well, 6 years Rokudame Dono, but that's not the point. I can't do your work for you. Those are very important decisions that I couldn't possibly understand. Well, you've got the job now, Naruto interrupted. It's my first order as the Hokage. As he strolled from the room, a flabbergasted woman trembling in his wake, he passed Jiraiya leaning against the wall with an amused lift of his lips playing across his features. Now why didn't any of the other Hokages ever think of that? He muttered before following behind the young blonde. Naruto twirled his red and white hat on his fingers as he exited the main building, casually walking down the road with not a care in the world. The village traffic left no opportunity to greet their new leader, smiles and waves and exclamations of adulation everywhere. It was a beautiful day in Konoha. The sun was beaming down upon the sandstone brickwork, dyeing the houses a fiery orange and the streets an eye-blinding white. A slight breeze blew through the air, causing the branches of a row of trees to dance mesmerizingly to a hidden tune. Jiraiya could tell he was happy with the situation so far, though the bombshell he dropped on the kid not more than an hour ago would probably start to show through soon. Naruto took a left and entered the main doors of Konoha Central Hospital, calling a quick hello to the nurse's desk but not stopping. Since his destination was one he'd frequented in the last 3 days since he'd returned to the village again. Jiraiya climbed the stairs behind him, sharing a quick grin before they reached the landing to Kakashi's room. They stepped in quietly to find Shisui and Enko already there, the former attempting to juggle 2 apples from Kakashi's fruit bowl with failure and the latter making mince meat out of another that was probably meant to be peeled and sliced for the patient to eat. All 3 glanced up as the Gama Sennin and new Hokage shut the door behind them, watching as Naruto strode over to the small bedside table and pulled a 3-pronged kunai from the pouch at his hip, twirled it twice in the air and slammed it point first into the table's surface. "Wanna explain what this is, Kashi?" Naruto asked evenly. Kakashi merely gaped, his eyes darting between the table and Naruto before finally coming to rest on Jiraiya accusatorially. "Isn't that the Yondaime's kunai?" Enko squinted. "It is," Shisui replied dryly. "What?" Jiraiya asked. "Why the heck didn't you tell me?" Naruto inquired, his eyes fixed unblinkingly on Kakashi's single visible eye. "Wait just a sec. You didn't know?" Kakashi retorted. "Shouldn't you be asking him that question?" Jiraiya shrugged his shoulders at Kakashi's finger pointing. "Unlike you, I was under a secrecy oath," the old ninja rejoined. "No one's blaming anyone here. I just want to know how it is that the son of your sensei practically lived with you for years and you didn't once think to tell him about his dad." Kakashi winced as if he'd been dealt a painful gut blow. "It's not that bad. I always thought you knew. Didn't you think it weird with all the references I made to Minato-sensei?" "Of course I did. Hell, half the time I was wondering what the heck the Yondaime had to do with anything whenever you said it," Naruto explained. "What's going on here, exactly?" Enko suddenly asked. Naruto gesticulated to the 2 glaring shinobi wildly. "These 2 morons knew all along that Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage, was my dad and they didn't once tell me. I think it'd have been a lot easier on me if I hadn't found out just before blowing his freakin' brains out." "Ouch," Shisui muttered. "That's gotta be difficult." "No kidding," Naruto said exasperatedly. "How many have you got?" "What?" Kakashi asked dumbly before diving under his blanket for a moment and then pushing himself to the surface. "I'm pretty sure I've always had 2. "Oh, shut up, man. You know what I meant," Naruto groaned as the others burst into unbridled laughter. "How many of the Hiraishin kunai did he give you?" Kakashi squirmed slightly under the number of stares pointed his way. "A couple are stashed back at my apartment. I think they're the ones Sensei gave Rin, Obito and I during the mission to Kanabi Bridge when Obito died. That's all. It's not like I made a habit of collecting them," he protested. "Well, you're not as bad as Ero Sennin. The toadhead here didn't bother to tell me that all the stuff he was teaching me was leading up to learning the Hiraishin." Cue sudden, suffocating silence. "You're learning the Hiraishin," Enko murmured rhetorically. "Oh yeah, it gets better though. I'm more than 2/3 of the way in," Naruto said wryly. "I told you he'd be strong," Shisui said. "Strong doesn't quite cut it, Shisui. Can you imagine giving a 14-year-old who already has a friggin' railgun at his beck and call? Popping up at the speed of light? We're all gonna die?" Shisui grinned manically. "I wouldn't be too surprised if I were you. You're talking about the kid who turned the world upside down within the space of a couple of weeks using Omni Paint in an extreme sport, if you could call it that." "Let's hope you will still come to the Cage Council," Jiraiya shrewdly said. "There's gonna be a council? Who died this time?" the purple-haired Junin responded. "Danzo," he smiled. "And all of you guys are gonna be there. We've got 1 week to have Kashi back on his feet," Naruto said. "It's here? In Konoha?" Shisui asked hurriedly. "Yeah, no idea how that happened. We're not exactly neutral," Jiraiya muttered. "Anyway, I got a heap of stuff to do 'cause I'm a busy guy, so I gotta go. See you lot later. Oh, and Enko? Kashi's gonna die if you try to feed that to him," Naruto threw over his shoulder as he raced out the door. The small bell tinkled merrily as the evening sun began to set. 1010 languidly turned the page, not really able to muster enough energy to check out whoever had entered the Higurashi weapons store. Of course, she shouldn't really be reading magazines while manning the storefront, but she couldn't bring herself to care about that either. She just felt sort of deflated, empty after the emotional rollercoaster her life had become. She'd meant to go say hi to Naruto earlier that day, the rest of the rookies had done so, but she wasn't brave enough to face him, not after the nightmare he'd been through. She felt her presence might pull it all up once again and he'd hightail it out of there before she got a word in edgewise. In her eyes. Konoha with Naruto in it was better than without, even if she wasn't able to speak to him like they used to. She hadn't considered that he might come to see her. Why would she, when she was as depressed as a black cat whose mouse just got run over by a passing truck? Nice shop you got going here, Ten-chan. Her head whipped up so fast she didn't know whether it had clicked or not. She wasn't sure she'd ever be able to move it again. Oh, wow, you've been learning a new language too, he chortled. Oh, shut up, mister, I'll just run away and leave my friends alone. That's a freaking long name. I think I'll stick to Naruto, thanks. He began to laugh and laugh. She couldn't help it, drawn into his rhythm, making her laugh and cry till her breath ran short and nothing came out except short, happy breaths. And then they were hugging, holding each other as if they were the only lifelines either of them had. Actually, it was probably her mind exaggerating things again because she was the only one who felt so dead without him there. How you been, Ten-chan? He whispered. Do you need to ask? She said, pointing to her streaming eyes. Point taken, he said, his arm still slung over her shoulder as he peered around the shop. Naruto-san would have been proud, you know, holding up his shop and all. She wiped at her eyes. The tears just wouldn't stop. Naruto took a deep breath. Hey, how about we have a spar, like old times? Ten jumped at the chance and soon found herself facing her old roommate with a fixable trio of nunchucks tapping the floor beside her. Naruto unzipped his jacket and tossed it to the side to reveal a mesh t-shirt and 2 daggers strapped to his hips. He pulled them from their sheaths. What happened to the wakizashi? The ones with the blue dragons? Naruto shrugged. I kinda dropped them when I left Konoha. I guess I was too scared to get them back, he said whimsically. Ten grinned melancholically before striding to a small cabinet at the side of the dojo they were currently situated in. Rummaging in it for a moment, she pulled 2 leather sheaths from within before handing them to him. Are those? Yup, she chirped. You can't be thinking of giving them to me, Naruto cried. Oh shush. You're the one who bought them for me in the first place. You're more likely to use them than I am, what with me not being a shinobi anymore, she replied. Naruto took them gingerly, placing his own daggers to the side as he slid the 2 shimmering daggers from their covers. They were every bit as beautiful as he remembered, glimmering prettily from varnished wooden handle to dangerously sharpened edge. As he held them, he marveled once again at their balance and poise. The beguilingly heavy handle offset by the irregular widening of the latter half of the blade, such that they almost resembled a shrunken cutlass should the end curve any further. The strikingly green dragons curled lazily up the sides, a gossamer glimmer the like of which could not be naturally replicated, and in that instant, he missed his own blades, the ones who'd partnered him through thick and thin. He resolved to track them down as soon as he could. All right, let's do this. Standard rules? She asked. Standard rules, he acknowledged. On the count of 3, Ten tossed a small coin, and as soon as it landed, the 2 friends sprang at each other, blood pounding in their ears. Through the haze of a good battle, Naruto's blunted edges pounding the sides of her 3-part staff. They flipped and ducked, swung and riposted. And then she separated her staff into its native form, nunchucks whizzing through the air almost too fast to see. The ante was upped, and Naruto wasn't going down without a fight. Ten twirled athletically, her arm lashing out, sending the chain whirling towards his head, and suddenly he wasn't there and she was on her back with a blunt edge at her throat, and only her fluttering top as evidence that something untoward had occurred. What was that? She panted. Tut, secrets, Ten-chan, he grinned. Naruto flopped down beside her, uncaring that half his arm rested on her own, causing goosebumps to grow on her exposed skin. They stared at each other for a while, both too tired to be embarrassed at their proximity. Was it the same thing you did in the Chunin exams? Against that Junin with the sword? She asked, her breath truly her own by then. You remember that, huh? He said. Yeah, it was. They lay there for a time that stole away from them like a squirrel with its first acorn, the silence comfortable and neither wanting to move just yet. Ten breathed deeply, her head clearer than it ever was before. Naruto? Yeah. Don't leave anymore. He looked at her then, his eyes clouded with despair. Ten realized that he'd been thinking about them all that time he'd been away, never a moment without, and it made her heart heavy that she'd been so selfish. She wished dearly that she could go back in time and change the way she'd been as a child, change the bratty, stubborn behavior that had driven a wedge between her only real friend. "You're still really good, you know," he murmured. "I reckon you'd beat me if I hadn't cheated there." "Of course I would," she said, laughingly. "I'm your elder and better after all. I'm not gonna leave again, Ten-chan. I'm done with running away." He turned to look up at the ceiling and she feared that should she interrupt, he'd not say something important. "I realized something after all that happened when Sarutobi Gigi died. Everyone has their faults and problems, but the people who get up there with the best, the people who we remember as the heroes of our world, they were the ones who overcame their own weaknesses and never gave in to them." He stood up slowly, brushing invisible lint from his 3/4, before helping her up. "I want to be like that. I want to be able to look back on my life and say that I never gave in even if something bad happened." She groaned. "What?" Naruto complained. "Don't tell me you're getting all philosophical on me now. Who'd you spend the last few years with? A dying old man?" "Actually, no way, seriously?" She chortled. "About that." And they walked back towards the room above the shop, chatting freely as two reunited friends always do. There were no titles or petty squabbles to come between them this time. Both had matured and outgrown their previous selves. The end. Haha, not really. Actually, I seriously considered ending it here. Things are really getting busy for me and I find myself opening my chapters less and less. How I wish I had the time I used to. Anyway, this was the chapter many of you have been waiting for. I killed some more cliches here as I usually do and I hope it was worth the wait. I know 5K words is rather paltry, what with the long months. Wait, but I'm still writing, although for how long, I'm not sure. Hopefully I'll be able to finish KAHF at least. Anyway, enjoy it and let me know if it lived up to your expectations. All the best. Mega B Council of the 5-Kage Konoha. At his fingertips by Mega B. Chapter 5. Council of the 5-Kage. The sun's rays shone brightly through his curtains, the fabric shifting almost lazily like a sunbathing cat. As he turned in his dreams, a spoke of light caught his eyelid, jolting him awake. Sudden consciousness like that was hard to shake off and most of the time one would not be able to regain the peaceful slumber that had been lost. Naruto groaned languidly, sitting up with bleary eyes squinting at the illuminated bedroom that seemed to mock him for no reason he could discern. He remained perched at the back of his bed for more than a few minutes simply staring around without any real purpose. Nobody would be able to tell that the short blonde-headed teenager was the military leader of one of the 5 world powers in the shinobi continent if they'd seen him now. His gaze drifted idly to the simple calendar he'd taped the wall so long ago. Immediately, his eyes caught onto a large red circle someone had penned onto the current day. He remained staring at it for a while, unable to understand just why the words, Council 5K, were generating such alarm in his groggy mind. That is, until someone slammed a fist on his bedroom door. "Naruto. Wake the hell up, you lazy Hokage. To think I'd have to come get you because you slept in on the most important day of your measly life." Ah, he thought, that must be Anko. And what does she mean by the most important day of my life? Wasn't that a week ago when I was forced into being the new Hokage? Sadly, the term of his emplacement had a startling effect on his mind and suddenly he remembered just what his calendar had meant to remind him of. Throwing his duvet off, he raced into the hall, pulling Anko aside on his way to the bathroom, sparing a moment to wave at Shisui who was calmly perusing the morning's paper and Kakashi who seemed content to lean against the wall trying to look cool. An interesting start to what would no doubt be an interesting day. Azumo and Katetsu had been given guard duties again. Of course, the world was scheming against them since it was all they ever seemed to get, not that they'd realized just yet. Most probably they never would too. So, in about 15 minutes, all 5Kage are gonna walk through that gate, huh? Azumo pondered. Yeah, seems like we've finally got the honor we deserve now that Naruto's the Hokage. I knew we'd be rewarded for slacking off all those times we didn't catch him for his pranks. Yes, they would never notice. The first to arrive was the imposing form of the Raikage. Kumogakure no Sato had cut all ties with Hai no Kuni after Naruto had left, stating anti-trust agreement which nobody quite understood. To those close to the Uzumaki Saiyan, it was quite simply that the only person the Lightning Country natives liked had left and that was that. The Hyuga had breathed a collective sigh of relief, although some said Hiashi's sigh was because of the reason and not Kumo's alliance at all. The Raikage stepped steadily through the gate, his large body shadowing his entourage, all of which had been seen at the Chunin exams 3 years prior. Killer B now sported strange headgear which looked to be a tea towel wrapped around his cranium. His many swords were a terribly frightening sight, however, so Kotetsu nudged Izumo in the side and they both glanced onwards. Following up behind them were Kumo's infamous Sanken, Samui, Karui and Omoi, and behind them was the Nibi's host, Yugito. The 6 of them stopped beside the guard booth, and as the Raikage turned to inquire after their lodgings, the rest slouched around. Samui massaged her shoulders, complaining all the while about her 2 teammates, while Karui and Omoi broke into another argument over something mindlessly inconsequential. B seemed to find rapping as loud as he could to himself amusing, and it was only Yugito who edged herself calmly away from them as if she really didn't want to be associated with the oddballs she'd been forced to travel with. Go straight to the Hokage's tower and you'll be met at the door. They'll lead you to the meeting room where you'll see the rest of the cage and their bodyguards. A word of warning though, our new Hokage is not to be trifled with, Kotetsu recited, scarcely believing his last few words and glancing fearfully at the man who was the strongest fighter in all of the northern lands. The Raikage's dish-like hand shot out and grabbed him by his collar. Do you know who you're talking to, little man? He growled. Sorry, that's just what I was told to say, Kotetsu stammered. Izumo simply stood stock still as if he'd seen a ghost. Bah! Come on guys, let's go see Naruto, to which all 5 cheered. The Raikage released him and after a single contemptuous look backwards, started off towards the center of the village. Luckily, there were 2 Anbu squads attached to each country's leader, leaving the entire force on duty that day. Kotetsu had a few moments to compose himself before the next group arrived, this time bearing the Hitteites of Suna. This was maybe even more frightening than the last. Gaara's exploits and fixation with holes made even his own countrymen quake at the mere mention of his name. They'd all taken to calling him the Kazekage. The Suna entourage was smaller than Kumo's, comprised of 4 people including the Kazekage himself. To his right and left were his siblings Temari and Konkaru, and just behind them, reading from an unfurled scroll, was their old sensei Baki. They too paused beside the guardhouse with their own inquiries. Where is Uzumaki Naruto? Gaara asked, his unblinking, unflinching stare boring holes into the poor Chunin like they were bugs before him. Izumo hurriedly clamped his mouth shut, sucked air quickly through his nostrils to have the skin seal around them and thanked the stars that Kotetsu was ideally placed to answer the Kazekage's questions. Please head to the Hokage Tower where you'll be given further instructions, he spoke haltingly. Gaara continued to stare at the pair for a moment, quirking his head ever so slightly at Izumo's rapidly coloring, oxygen-deprived head before turning on his heel with a sharp nod and continuing onwards towards the balustrade entering the village proper. Temari and Konkaru snickered as they walked past, though Baki simply remained with his face stuck within the confines of his parchment and whatever he found so interesting on its surface. Izumo expelled air in one explosive rush, falling to his knees at having held his breath for so long. What is wrong with you? Kotetsu asked, shivering comically. Why, you're not one to tea-talk. I seriously thought he was going to plug any holes he saw with that blasted sand of his. If that meant my nose and mouth, Izumo said breathlessly. Well, that should be the worst of them, right? I mean, the other cage are sane people, aren't they? Excuse me, someone said. I hope so. There was a war in Kiri up until last year, so we'd probably get a serious Mizukage this time around. Excuse me. The same squeaky voice called out. Izumo and Kotetsu glanced around in confusion before shaking themselves. There was nobody in sight. True, and the Tsuchikage's really old and tiny, I've heard. Well, I apologize for my old and tiny body, you measly weasels. The 2 glanced down to find an old man with twin wisps of white hair flying angrily on either side of his head and a nose that was so red, he looked like he had a terrible cold. He stood about 4 feet above the ground, a flowing mustache upon his lip and a pointed beard almost to his sternum. The crimson and emerald robes of his station as the 3rd Tsuchikage stood out like a sore thumb, however, and the 2 Chunin gawked with obvious surprise. Now would you, please, hurry up and stop insulting my height and tell us where to go while you're at it, he growled. Oh, relax, Tsuchikage-sama, a deep, rumbling voice said, originating from a stomach that seemed just as deep in girth. He's right, Oanoki, the other bodyguard responded. You don't want to get your blood pressure up, do you? Silence. Kuretsuchi. How dare you insult me like that? The Tsuchikage replied angrily. Said Kuretsuchi simply smiled in a placating manner as if the sight of his curved lips were the answer to everything, and Kotetsu began to wonder that maybe the only people who became stronger than everyone else were actually the people who were crazier than everyone else too. Follow the main road into the city till you reach a large circular building with the word, "Hi," on it, Azumo said quickly, wanting to alleviate the pressure on his friend. About time, children. My old bones are creaking because of your time wasting, Oanoki wheezed, beginning to hobble down the street slowly, his two companions beside him. As soon as they were out of earshot, Kotetsu cast a disbelieving eye at his teammate. That tiny old man is a cage. What tiny old man? And suddenly, a bandaged face swam into view before them, not but an inch from Kotetsu's nose. The new Mizukage, it seems, had just arrived. How intelligent you are, Hokage-sama. Everyone turns up to see you and you rub it in by turning up late. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a war on our hands. Iwa already hates us, Enko complained, trying to keep up with her sprinting companions and talking at the same time. Hey, I never said I was the right person for this job anyway. Try telling Gigi that, Enko. Nay, Naruto replied. Oh yeah, blame it on the dead guy, she retorted. Ma, Sandame-sama was responsible, so maybe he does have a point. Kakashi snuck in. Shisui began to snigger as Enko happily glared at everyone. What she's really irked about is that she has to pull bodyguard duty on Ruto, Shisui offered. What if I'm attacked? Naruto asked indignantly. We won't even be able to pick up all the pieces, Enko snorted. And I mean of the guys who attacked you, not you. Can't we all just feel the love? Kakashi smirked. Naruto ignored his squabbling companions as he hit the ground running, Hokage cloak streaming behind him and his hat askew as he charged through the double doors at the base of Hokage Tower, not even sparing a glance for poor Ren, whose head was buried under towering stacks of paper that he should probably have been processing. Taking the stairs 3 at a time, he cut into the first floor and only had time to stop and take in a couple of breaths before slamming the door to the conference room open with a huge bang, and swaggering right in as if he owned the place. Which he did, but those are details best left forgotten for ego's sake. Of course, he was totally unprepared for the sight his eyes were met with. Gaara. Since when did you become Kage? He called enthusiastically, his head only then beginning to take in the rest of the room. B. How's it going, man? Who's the old guy? The Tsuchikage's gaze immediately turned frosty and Enko cringed as she only just entered the room. That was a bad start for Iwahai relations already. Sitting beside Oanoki was a sight nobody had expected to see at all. Perfectly balanced, long black hair elegantly flowing from his head, this time a hite adorning his forehead, sat none other than Haku. Behind him stood the infamous demon of the hidden mist. Zabuza remained his imposing self, glaring at everyone and fingering his Kabikari Hucho as if he were simply itching to chop somebody's head off. So Momochi Zabuza-san, how did you make it to Mizukage? Kakashi said, he and Shisui sidling up to stand beside Enko. You think I'm the Mizukage? Bah, don't make me laugh, he snarled, his pointy teeth peeking through the bandages around his mouth. The gender-confused brat's the Mizukage, I'm his attack dog. Did he just call himself a dog? Shisui whispered. Oh yes, and I'm perfectly alright with that as long as I get to kill people, Zabuza retorted, a dangerous glint in his eye. And there are no shortages of people to kill in Kiri right now. Makes for a good breakfast. Kakashi eyed the man for a while longer, not sure he trusted him in Naruto's presence until he hollered for all to hear. Oi Gaki. How's life been as life's little rebel Keeping in trouble, I hope? Naruto smiled in delight, clapping Haku on the back as he turned to the demon of the mist. You're not looking so bad yourself, Sawtooth. Who you calling Sawtooth, midget? I've got more than enough to spare on the likes of you, Zabuza yelled. Oh, but they're so pretty, Naruto crooned. That seemed to shut him up. Naruto turned back to the young Mizukage. So Haku, how come you're the Mizukage now, huh? Naruto asked excitedly. Is it just me, or does Naruto have way too many friends in high places? Anko muttered. Are you kidding me, Anko? He practically rules the world at this point, Shisui replied. 3 of the 4 other Kage either have a vested interest in him, or are his friends. At the rate he's going, he'll have carnivals set up in each of the hidden villages with all those extreme sports. It was a testament to just how frightening that thought was when Anko gaped in horror. Naruto Dono, Zabuza-sama refused to become Mizukage after the rebels retook the country from the feudal lord and his followers. He decided I was the best person for the job, Haku said bashfully. Well, definitely better than Sawtooth over there. He'd probably just end up killing all his ninja. And hey, what have I told you about being so uptight? Naruto said. How, do you know Naruto? Gaara chipped in, his monotonous voice causing silence to reign once more. His reputation was known so well that even the bodyguards present shuffled uneasily at the sound of his voice. Me and Haku go way back, Gaara, Naruto said, slapping the cage on the back and causing everyone to gasp and wince and move as far away as possible. If Gaara became annoyed, nobody wanted to be within a 50-mile radius. Naruto Dono's sensei, Jiraiya-sama, helped us during our victory over the old Mizukage and his shinobi. All the free citizens of Kiri are indebted to them, Haku spoke softly. I see, Gaara replied. Do you like holes? If the escorts were scared before, they were practically quivering by now. Kankuro and Temari began to edge their way out of the room. Haku, however, was very confused. Holes? I can't say I do. What significance does that have, Kage Dono? Good, Gaara said with a decisive nod as if he'd gotten the precise answer he was looking for and approved of it. All holes should be plugged, should they not? Ah, I suppose, Haku muttered, glancing at Naruto in bewilderment. Oh, don't worry about Gaara, Haku. He's just a bit crazy about holes, that's all. Nothing wrong with that. There was something very wrong with that, of course, but everyone was too scared to admit it. So Naruto, how goes your training? The Raikage boomed jovially. Smashed any more trees recently? Haha, funny question. Ya know what, man? Ero Sennin told me it was all for learning this damned cool jutsu my dad knew back in the day. It even has a name and everything. How cool is that? What kinda jutsu makes you slam into trees though? Omoi asked around the toothpick he seemed to forever chew. It's called the Hiraishin. Naruto chirped. Anko shivered at the silence that fell in the room. It was an unearthly silence, a silence that wrapped itself around an environment filled with people, but those people could not be heard, could not move, nor did their hearts seem to beat. And it lasted a while too. Until, of course, it was broken by an old man with a grudge spanning many decades and a red nose to boot. Hiraishin. The Tsuchikage squeaked. Why, you can't learn that. You're not one of that blasted Namikazes. Bloodline. Did you even hear him, man? He just said his dad was the Yondaime Hokage, Kankuro offered in awe. Naruto's strong, yo, his dad don't mean no, B said, but everyone ignored him. It took a while for them to digest that tidbit of information. In fact, it seemed as if the Tsuchikage would never recover from the indigestion. Ma, I think we need to get down to business, Kakashi cut in. They landed softly, wind playing through the quaint, long grass as if a many-fingered hand were gently brushing itself across the field. However, the breeze reached a hollow bowl stretching over a large expanse, the surface of which was entirely glass. This was, after all, the last known location of Higurashi Naoto's trade caravan. Jiraiya whistled lowly, passing a critical eye over the environmental anomaly. That had to be one hot fire, he remarked, glancing over at his on-again teammate. For her part, Tsunade never broke conversation, only flicking her eyes casually to the left to announce the presence of their pursuer. You can come out now, Su Taiko-san, Jiraiya called. The figure materialized almost imperceptibly. One moment there was nothing and the next a human was standing not 2 paces from the Sannin-turned duo. There was neither a sound nor any other warning to announce its presence. Jiraiya-sama, Tsunade-sama, the figure greeted, not in the slightest abashed at being caught out. In fact, they'd probably known they were being shadowed since before they had left Konoha's hallowed walls, but neither of them would point it out either. Tsunade maintained her chakra net as the three advanced cautiously, stepping carefully onto the surface that was mildly warm to touch. They could still feel traces of the heat that had turned the sandplane to glass through the soles of their footwear. Uchiha handiwork, no doubt about it, Jiraiya muttered. It was early morning, mists from the sleepy beach towns floating down from Kiri and invading the countryside outside of Basai. The sun had not yet risen and the air was still a murky navy blue, with tints of gray swirling low across the ground. Ever more unsettling was the effect this had on the surface of the glass bowl. The fog having condensed in patches, glittering ominously though not lit enough to reveal anything below its surface. They poked further along, stopping infrequently to stare ponderously down, attempting to make out anything within the flash-baked structure below their feet. Jiraiya almost shivered. If they were fortunate, or maybe truly unfortunate, something might still be alive down there even though it had been over 2 years since the event had occurred. Right about here, Tsunade announced. The largest chakra signature is right below our current position, so it either happened here, or some damn strong guy went down all guns blazing. Jiraiya settled onto his haunches, peering below just as the first of the sun's rays touched the surface of the glass. Before, he would have said the construct was disconcerting. A material that appeared to be slightly hollow, shifting ever so slightly as if an unknown creature was moving around down there. The answers it held but refused to give up granted it an air of mystery that creeped the hell out of him. But that was nothing compared to what happened next. There was a brief flash of light, reflection bursting upon the unexpected eye, but that faded as fast as it came. Tsunade gasped involuntarily and made to hastily step back until she realized what she was seeing. There were bodies down there, at least, parts of bodies, and the light, as it struck at its angle, couldn't penetrate the depths of the crystalline glass completely, and so the onlookers were left with fleeting glimpses of heads and eyes and errant appendages. The sand had crystallized faster than a human body could burn. They shook off their shock after a few moments as best as possible, Jiraiya touching the surface with a shaking chakra-coated finger. The glass rippled like water yet held firm. Chakra glass, the Anbu member said softly. As long as elemental fire is used, the trace of chakra will be visible. Tsunade was worried now. She'd cancelled the net and was running through field diagnostics at an impressive rate. The Anbu captain unsheathed a worn chikuto and pressed the tip into the ground. The sword slipped easily through its surface though it made no visible hole nor blemish on its surface. No doubt about it, it's definitely been done using a Kaiden or two, Jiraiya remarked. This would have to be Itachi's work. There's nobody on the earth who could pull this off but him. Well, except Sarutobi, but he was verifiably in Konoha, Tsunade said distractedly. There's clearly something down there though. I think the chakra signature is still here because not only did whoever burned the whole place do it from here, but also. Also what? Jiraiya asked. There's something else. Something I can't quite put my finger on. It's almost as if, a tenketsu, that's the best analogy I can give. Like an unopened gate channel? Jiraiya inquired. Exact. With a mighty flare of chakra and a dull gong, the air around them suddenly shone with an otherworldly light. Jiraiya hastily stood and backed up until the three of them stood side by side, staring wondrously up at the huge sigil that blossomed into view like a magnified diamond. Glowing fog flitted around its curves, lines swirling until they met up with the center of the sign, spinning slowly as if it had always been there. Uzu. Tsunade breathed softly. No, Jiraiya said faintly. That's not where Uzu got that from. Tsunade turned to stare at him in bewilderment, but it wasn't he who answered. The Edian library, the Anbu captain commander answered. Higurashi-san found an artifact. Slowly, the Anbu member reached up to remove the mask that had stood unerringly upon stiff shoulders. As it came away, it revealed locks of dark red hair that spilled from the strap that had held it up all this time. Uzumaki Marina breathed slowly at the implication. It doesn't make sense, Marina-chan, Jiraiya said. Please don't use my name, she whispered, stepping forward and tracing the structure with her hand almost reverently. I was banished for a reason. Wasn't the library completely destroyed? Kushina told us there wasn't anything left. Perhaps not, was his only reply. Marina was Kushina's cousin. Where Kushina had been flighty and brash, Marina was calm and collected. She had entered Konoha many years before Kushina had, though no one knew quite how she had become exiled from Uzu no Kuni before the war had torn the country to shreds. They hadn't been close, her and Kushina. Marina had spent more time with her Chikuto in Anbu than with another human being. Jiraiya couldn't begin to imagine what was going through the woman's mind. Anger at her exile? Or just relief that there was something of her origins left in this world? Well, it was probably triggered by my prodding, Tsunade confessed, glancing shakily at the shifting floor. Whatever it was damn powerful. Someone wanted to cover this up, and didn't mind blowing up the whole place to do it. Maybe not Itachi then. I can't see Akatsuki not wanting to get their hands on it if it's that powerful, Jiraiya effused. No, it was Itachi, Marina murmured, her gaze still riveted to the glowing talisman floating above them. This would be under the scope of his mission. His mission? Tsunade asked sharply. Sarutobi had hidden many things from them once the Sannin had split, understandably so given his position, but this sounded too important. Yes, Marina whispered. His final mission. So let me get this straight, Naruto groused. This hurt guy. Pain, Naruto. That's his actual name, Anko said exasperatedly. Yeah, him. So he's coming to kill me or whatever, just because Toby couldn't. That's right, little man, the Raikage intoned. Guy's got a grudge cause his underling got snuffed. And how do you know this? The Tsuchikage squeaked, though everybody knew the fight had gone out of him since Naruto's previous proclamation. He was just an annoying old man by nature. Because we've been monitoring them, how else? The Raikage sighed. I've had recon teams pulling fortnightly runs across the border since the Konoha Chunin exams. We haven't always seen them, but having most of the last team eliminated and one guy let go for a madman's ego is enough proof for me. Well, that does sound convincing, Shisui offered. Which way did your spy say he was going? Gaara pulled their attention back to the most important point. Let's assume he's coming from Aim no Kuni, Samui said, stepping forward quickly. Pain would have to loop through Kusa to get into High unnoticed. The border is too heavily guarded after the Civil War and Salamander's death for him to have come straight in. What if he didn't come from Aim? I've heard rumors that their base is off the coast from Kiri, Kakashi said. We've heard that too, Samui acknowledged with a tilt of her head. But the team he took down was running patrol up the edge of Kusa since High's shinobi have been practically relocated elsewhere. The subtle jab at Danzu's leadership was simply ignored at this point. As the adults began to discuss the latest emergency, Naruto was feeling very bored. The threat of sudden, violent death no longer affected him now that Madara was dead. He'd come through such a frightening ordeal that he no longer felt scared because another crazy was after him again. Psst, Haku. Oi Haku, Naruto whispered quietly, tapping the young Mizukage on the knee. You see, the Hokage tower attendants had passed through 5 minutes before, bringing with them trays laden with a triple-layered cream cake. This cake was Naruto's favorite thing about the council. In fact, it could be said that the only reason the date had been circled on his calendar was because of the cake they would serve. Apparently, the cooks only made the cake for visiting Kage, and Naruto had seen the Sandaime eat it only once, the day the old Kage had passed through on a trade meeting when he was little, and yet he vividly remembered the old leader almost passing out with a blissful look on his face with the first spoon. He'd saved the cake so as not to embarrass himself eating in front of the Kage. And so, Naruto had gobbled his up as quickly as possible. It was every bit as good as he thought. There were 3 slices of butterfly cake, each interspersed with a thick filling of sweetened double cream of the purest white. The top layer of cream was completed with a fine coating of roasted almonds and peanuts. It was the best thing he had ever tasted, and he wanted more. Anko was the only one who saw him mutter something into Haku's ear and point beneath the table. As the dainty boy bent over to check underneath, Naruto had snatched up Haku's cake and was quickly spooning it into his mouth. Haku cried out in surprise. My cake, he cried. Everyone stopped talking once again, pausing from discussing Naruto's death in gory detail and what else pain might do to his body. You stole my cake. Fish-ish my cake, Naruto said between mouthfuls. You had your cake already, Naruto, that was my slice and you know it. Just what is, the Tsuchikage tried to interject. I am the Hokage and this is my cake, Naruto exclaimed, pointing his spoon to the ceiling as if warning the skies. Wait, So pain controls clones using some black rod things? Shisui said, attempting to restart their previous important conversation. Anko was doubled over laughing so hard, but something occurred to her then that made all the mirth sort of disappear. Well, not disappear, but it was so profound that it was almost too funny to laugh at. Wait. Naruto. Did you become Hokage because you wanted that cake? She gasped. Is that why you said yes when we told you they wanted to hold the council here? Now that you mention it, Shisui muttered, scratching his chin idly. It was strange that he accepted so quickly. Naruto peered around frantically, looking for support among the amused, angry and insulted faces around him. Except Gaara. Gaara had a fiendishly excited glint to his otherwise impassive face, but that only worried Naruto even more. You guys suck. This meeting's so boring anyway, and before anyone could stop him, be blasted out of the room as if his life depended on it. Truth. The Rokudame Hokage only leads us because of cake, Shisui said proudly. The Raikage threw his head back and roared with laughter, tears trailing down his cheeks. Kankuro, Temari and Anko were splitting their sides trying to hold theirs in while Kakashi sort of looked nonplussed. Well, he said, I kind of guessed that already. Once they'd gotten their respective plans ironed out, the military leaders of each major country moved on to lighter topics much to the chagrin of the Tsuchikage. Meanwhile, Anko, Shisui and Kakashi decided their time was better spent looking for their frustrating Hokage and young friend. They found him out back of the Hokage Tower in a small clearing that had been old Sarutobi's favorite place for training his grandson, Konohamaru, during his long tenure as the Sandaime. Naruto tensed imperceptibly before throwing the three-pronged kunai his erstwhile father had been famous for. With a thunk, it embedded itself into a large tree heralding a black and blonde flash that lit up the area briefly. Unfortunately, Naruto hadn't fared so well with his latest attempt of the Hiraishin, for he toppled over with dizziness almost as soon as he reappeared in the shade of the tree. Still can't get it, Ruto? Shisui called. Naruto shook his head, attempting to dispel the disconcerting effects on his senses as he turned to regard his friends. Gah. It's so bad. Every time I try it, the speed is just too much. It'll be no use in a fight if some guy can easily stab me between the eyes when I use it, will there? Naruto complained. True, Kakashi commented. But remember, it took your father almost 10 whole years to perfect it. The tag on the Hiraishin kunai is a very complex summoning seal, but not the way you're thinking. It also has its drawbacks which you should be aware of. Drawbacks? Anko echoed. Exactly, Kakashi returned. Sensei always told us to be careful where we stuck them because the seal physically yanks the user to it when it pierces a surface. This means that if an object stands between the user and the kunai, said user will end up crashing through a tree, which would be quite uncomfortable. Hey, so are you telling us, Shisui piped up, curiosity piqued, that all those stories you've told us about Minato giving you and your team his kunais to chuck around whenever you want was actually a lie? I mean, what would be the use if he couldn't just appear from anywhere? Why give them to you in the first place? Kakashi hummed. Well, I can probably think of 2 reasons really. Firstly, because he could somehow track us using them. No doubt his own adjustments to the sealing property. But also because if he caught up to us in time, he could get the drop on the enemy through his line of sight. In fact, I don't think he ever used it in a situation where he couldn't see where they landed. It was just too risky. What about a canopy bridge? Anko asked, ignoring the side tightening of the Xanbu's eyes at her prompting. You said the Yondaime saved you when you threw it and passed out, right? Yeah, Kakashi muttered gruffly. I never asked him about it, but I think he must have arrived just after I got out of the cave where Obito died and decided to see how things would play out. At any rate, Naruto, Kakashi continued. The very nature of the jutsu means your body experiences speeds that the human body cannot fully comprehend. It wasn't the seal that made Sensei take so long to use it, he was a fuinjutsu master after all. It was the conditioning. So your reflexes have to be up to it, huh? Naruto finally said. Yes, Kakashi nodded. It's why I created the Chidori actually. Sensei warned me not to use it in battle because my eyes couldn't react fast enough to actually strike with it. At the time I thought Sensei could teach me how to gain his sort of reaction speed. I guess the Sharingan gave me a way out back then. Did he ever tell you what he did? Naruto wheedled. Sorry Naruto, Kakashi said ruefully. You're on your own on this one. Maybe Jiraiya-sama could help. Naruto groaned unhappily, raising himself unsteadily and turning to the tree to yank the kunai from its place. You could always use it while it's still in the air though, Shisui mused, looking thoughtfully at the kunai in Naruto's hand. I mean, does it have to land for it to work? Probably not, but I wouldn't want to try messing with that seal. Well, unless Jiraiya-sama wants to take a look at it, Kakashi intimated. Reflexes huh? Naruto considered. Wait just a damn sec. Excitedly, he raced back to the middle of the clearing, tossing his utility belt to the side before relaxing into a slouch and raising his arms until they were parallel to the ground. Naruto, what? Shush, lemme try something here, he whispered urgently, eyes closed. Slowly, he began to spin like a top, faster and faster until he was naught but a blur. It was almost uncanny, the trio thought. How a peaceful summer's day could certainly turn so chaotic due to the presence of a single individual. A dull roar rose in pitch to mimic the speed of Naruto's rotation. Wind chakra visibly screaming around his body as it propelled him further, kicking up all manner of debris as he almost literally drilled into the ground. And then he suddenly stopped, quivering like an arrow slammed into the ground, centered in a deep gouge up to waist level. But his eyes were alight with delight. He was teaching me that all along, he gasped. Man, he knew exactly what I needed. How? Naruto. What are you talking about? Shisui questioned bewilderingly, still awed at the blatant show of power not moments before. The Oji-san I met in Mori, Naruto said haltingly, struggling to pull in enough oxygen to voice his thoughts. He couldn't speak, but somehow he knew I wanted to train and he used to draw these funny drawings with his stick and. Naruto. Anko cut in. Calm the heck down and get to the point. Naruto gulped in air, steadying himself before continuing. See, Gigi couldn't speak. So when he found out I wanted to train and I was a shinobi, he came up with some exercises for me to try. And that was one of them? Kakashi asked. Yeah, Naruto confirmed. It was. He used to tap me when he thought I'd had enough. But don't you see, this is what I need. What are you talking about, Ruto? Anko inquired in confusion. But Naruto didn't reply, too excited to be delayed from his seeming epiphany. Jogging over to his fallen pouch, he pulled the kunai from its resting place and tossed it, handle first, to Kakashi. Chuck that at the tree when I'm spinning all right, he said before returning to his gouged circle of earth. Sharing a glance, the three friends shrugged and Kakashi prepared to throw the Hiraishin kunai. Naruto quickly picked up speed before Kakashi thought he'd gotten fast enough. Deftly pitching the kunai at a random tree, Kakashi pondered on the effect of the technique Naruto was using and how it would change by being yanked at high speed in a linear direction. Simple mechanics dictated that his spin would lead him straight into the thing, especially if he wasn't focusing on stopping as he usually was, and that always left him disorientated. But Naruto, as he was wont to do, defied all known laws of mechanics as a flash of yellow left his quivering in the shade of the targeted tree. Eyes slightly vacant but a happy smile stretching his features regardless. He did it, Shisui breathed. Or so it would seem, Kakashi returned. This is it, Naruto exploded, turning to them with a manic grin. I just have to get used to the speeds involved, right? I can do this. I see, Kakashi acquiesced. But you can't do that every time you'd need the jutsu, it's too time consuming for a pinch. True, but with practice. Anko shot back. That's what I was thinking too, Anko nay, he said happily. Who was that Oji-san? Shisui asked skeptically, voicing the question everyone had been thinking, even Naruto. I dunno. But whoever he really is, Naruto sobered, he's a genius. By the end of the day, the 5 Kage had come to a majority on what the likely plan of action would be to deal with the looming threat of Akatsuki's leader. Much to everyone's dismay, Naruto had declared that since Pain was after him, it was his business and no one else's. That had earned him further respect in his fellow Kage's eyes, even Oanoki, but left them feeling unsatisfied. Gaara had then announced his plan to seek out Akatsuki's base of operation in order to destroy it, although his exact words had something to do with sand and lots of it. The other 3 leaders had quickly jumped in and pledged their own contingents to the cause. As a final insult, Naruto had returned to find more cake on the table and upon attempting to eat it, had realized Gaara had purposefully filled his mouth with sand. The Suna delegation had zipped out of the gates to Konoha in stitches with an irate Naruto screaming after them and alternately attempting to rid his tongue of the stale, dry taste lingering behind. Oanoki had slipped away grumbling, followed by his happily waving bodyguards, leaving the leaders of Hai, Kaminari and Kiri to say their goodbyes and go their respective ways, which for Naruto meant his flat. "Well Gaki, it was a pleasure doing business as always," Zabuza rumbled. "You just tell that perverted sensei of yours that I said hi." Naruto shook his proffered hand. "I'll definitely tell him that, Sawtooth," he grinned. "You take care Haku." The two waved as they set off. Well, Haku waved. Zabuza seemed to be trying to chop Naruto's head off if he'd remembered to use his Zanbatsu. "We've got your back whenever you need us," the Raikage said, his imposing form stepping up to hug the boy. "Konoha's gonna be a fun place to watch." "Yeah Naruto, just be careful not to kick any rocks, okay?" Omoi warned, only to be slapped upside the head. "Stay safe kiddo." Samui smiled as she touched him on the shoulder and leapt for the trees, her team following her. B and Yugito caught up the rear, the former having slapped Naruto on the back as he passed and the latter favoring him with a small smile. "My band of misfits, seems like you got your own, Naruto," and with that parting shot, the Raikage took off after them. "He called us misfits?" Anko stated indignantly, "We're normal. Compared to those buffoons." "Omoi's a buffoon," Kakashi said. "But Samui and Karui are not to be trifled with." "Yeah," Shisui agreed. "Except Karui's so blatantly got a crush on him. I won't deny Samui though. That woman's a beast on the battlefield." "Or so they say," Anko muttered. "Jealous?" Shisui smirked. "Yeah right," Anko snorted. "I could so totally take her." "Sure you could." Shisui crowed triumphantly, poking her in the side. "I could, easily too. What could she do without that sword of hers?" "Nothing if snakes have stolen it. Give it a rest you two," Kakashi cut in. "I'm sure they're strong enough to give each of us trouble, well. Except Naruto," Shisui chuckled. "If they're not squashed in a moment, they'd be blown up or buried or drilled into or rail-gunned into oblivion." "Hey, you don't get to cuss me when I'm stronger than you," Naruto cried. "Why not?" Shisui said. "I mean you'd never do any of those things to us, right?" Anko visibly gulped and Naruto noticed, a devilish smile spreading across his features. "There was this one time." "What?" Shisui asked, alarmed. "He did something to you Anko?" "When he first figured out that dratted railgun thing of his, well, after his cutlery stopped attacking him," Anko chortled. "Ah, Anko nay. You promised not to say anything," Naruto whined. The four of them turned back to go home, their lighthearted banter giving way to chuckles as the sun slowly set behind them. What would come, and when it did, they'd be ready for it, that they could guarantee. "Don't kill me, so yeah, I've been humongously busy for the last year or so. In fact, first my final year of education started, then I thought I might have to stop writing altogether. In fact, I did stop writing altogether. And then I read this one story called The Girl with Red Hair. And suddenly the urge to write was so overpowering that I opened up this chapter after 10 whole months and actually made some progress on it. So yeah, I'm back in the game for now. How long, who knows? But I'm going to try and finish this series with all my heart, and I think it shows in this chapter. While many of you may have noticed my slow loss of interest in the Naruto anime and manga, the characters I've built here, let's just say I'm emotionally invested and I want them to reach their end just as I started and shaped them into how I saw them all this time. I hope I can share that all with you. Be out.